to declare any interest, financial or otherwise, as we move through today's business. And also with regards to your tablet, you can switch the volume off its function and F8. Apologies, I don't believe we have any apologies, but if members are aware of any. No? Okay, thank you. Just Chair's business, advise you that Stephen Muttrey has left our committee. We'd just like to extend our best wishes to him and to thank him for the contributions which he made and his time on the committee. He was here for around a year, and I'd also like to welcome, in his absence, Nelson McCausland, who's joining our committee. Members will be aware that we had our STEM event last Wednesday. Mr. Lund, did you want to say something?
Come again?
Did you want to say something? No?
No.
I was anticipating something.
Just looking at you, I'm being attentive here.
Oh, really? I hope it remains that way. Okay, our STEM event last Wednesday was a success. That was in conjunction with SETMUS and involved a number of local schools. We had a good attendance from the committee as well, but really just to thank the committee staff and also extend our thanks to SETMUS for organising the event. We got quite a good coverage from it as well. So if members are content, then that we write to SETMUS thanking them and also to those schools who participated. The committee is also awaiting publication of the EDI report on the delivery of STEM in primary schools through the World Around Us segment of the revised curriculum, so we're going to return to this at a later date. And if members are content, that perhaps we would do arrange a visit and a committee meeting at W5 in the not so distant future, if you're content that we do that. Okay.
That's good.
Minutes of the meeting of the 30th of September. Are members content that they're an accurate reflection of that meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. Matters arising, the monitoring round. Just refer you to draft correspondence at page 13, which includes a number of requests for information. You'll remember from last week's session that, well, those of you who remained, we did have a quorum issue, so it made decision making difficult. So there's a draft letter which is being prepared, and it's at page 13. Are members content with that, or would you like to amend? Content?
Content.
Okay, generally content. Thank you very much. Moving then to our shared and integrated education inquiry. Further submissions to that inquiry have been put onto the SkyDrive Pro link, and I've been pretty content then that we allow that to be published on our website. The clerk's also provided a summary paper on the evidence. Will provide a summary paper of the evidence after the close of submissions on the 24th of October. If members are content, just in order to broaden that out a little, in order to, I suppose, maybe just to sort of increase participation in the inquiry, if you're content that we maybe write to Professor Alan Smith, and he's from UNESCO Centre from Northern Ireland, and also to Brandon Hamber at the University of Ulster, the Encore Group, and Sir Bob Salisbury. If anyone has any other suggestions, they're very welcome.
I was going to ask you, Chair, if we have other suggestions over the next couple of weeks, can we bring them to the clerk?
Yes, of course. No, we can
bring them soon before it
closes on the 24th of October, so it would need to be quite
that's right.
quite quick. But if you do have some thoughts, certainly share those. Okay. We have some table items with regards to the education bill. That's just further information which we'd requested from the Minister, and that's in your table, pages 29.
At the back of
table
items.
items.
Just some information on the Education Authority. It's not much information, but the committee had requested some further background on the structure, and we'd ask questions about change management strategy. But the reply is there.
It's very light in detail.
It is.
Although we may wish to pursue that, obviously, on Tuesday, when we have an opportunity in the House. Okay, so we'll note at this stage, but we will be returning to it. Our first briefing this morning is primary school area planning, and we have the joint ELBs and CCMS briefing. Just refer you to the clerk's cover note at page 16 and relevant papers, including a briefing note from CCMS, an area planning consultation report, note of issues raised at the committee's area planning event, and papers from the committee's special advisor. And just like to welcome officials. We have Malachy Crudden, who is the Senior Education Advisor at CCMS, Gregory Butler, Chief Executive of South Eastern Education Library Board, Ray Gilbert, Senior Education Officer at NEELB, Rosemary Watterson, Chief Administrative Officer at WELB, and Mike Donaghy, Head of Development Planning and Support Services at SELB. Unfortunately, the representative from the Belfast Board was unable to attend due to a family bereavement, and unfortunately then didn't nominate anyone in his place. Can I welcome you all to committee this morning, and could I ask you to make an opening statement, and members will follow up with some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come forward. I will make an opening statement on behalf of the 5 boards and CCMS, and obviously at that point happy to take members' questions. Firstly, I suppose just to say that we welcome the concept of area planning, but also to make the point that the statutory duty of boards since their inception around ensuring there are sufficient places of suitable character within an area, and working obviously in partnership with our colleagues in CCMS and other bodies, is something which has been an ongoing piece of work, and our responsibilities to make provision. But we certainly welcome the opportunity that area planning has brought to perhaps be a bit more strategic and together on that as we move forward. In terms of just the opening statement, a number of areas that I'd like to draw attention to. Really looking at the educational case for area-based planning, because it's very important that we recognise that the whole process is about providing for young people's education and making provision for that. Talk a little bit about the process that we've used in area-based planning as a group. Perhaps some comments just about the distinctiveness of the primary sector, given that our focus today is the primary area plans. Setting all of that in the context of the programme for government and policy, which is very, very important, and to stress the regional and cross-sectoral approach that has been taken to area-based planning. And really moving into the context for area planning, we recognise first of all that it is planning for a purpose, and that purpose is to deliver on key policies, and we link into things like the Northern Ireland Children's Plan, the overall objectives within education to raise standards and to remove barriers for learning, and to enable young people and children, young people, to have access to their curricular entitlement and also the wider experiences that school brings, because while we recognise the absolute importance of the formal curriculum, as we all know, an awful lot of what children learn at school is learned in a whole lot of other ways through the informal and experiences and the ability to provide for that in terms of schools. We recognise that this is also around making efficient use of resources in a time when resources are under great pressure. And we recognise also that, in particular in respect to the primary sector, one of the significant issues is around the area of unfilled places in the primary sector, and we recognise that is a challenging area. We recognise it's an area that is under review, and we also recognise that as the primary curriculum has developed, the needs of schools in respect to space have changed quite dramatically. For example, in the foundation stage, where the method of teaching now is very different to what it was a number of years ago. And we see that the planning process, which is looking ahead to make sure that there is appropriate provision, will guide also strategic decisions about, again, the use of very scarce resources. We also recognise that while the device which we were using in respect to predicting the future is very much built around the needs model, and again we recognise a number of issues that sit around that, but we do look at population figures, birth rates and so on and so forth. And we're very mindful, obviously, in terms of the predicting future trends, that once you go beyond a number of years in the primary sector, you're also talking about children who haven't yet been born, and you have to take that into account. So it's an ongoing iterative process that's there. In terms of the purpose of area-based planning, which is detailed within the documentation, but I think stressing, it is about provision to meet the needs of young people and trying to ensure that the needs of young people and communities are met in order to achieve policy objectives. It is around planning future provision, and certainly our experience would be that there's one of the most difficult jobs is that where there is a significant decline and the school comes under stress, and I suppose what we're trying to look ahead is, as is stated in the area planning documentation, to provide a network of sustainable schools to avoid that awful experience that sometimes happens where a school, because of demographic downturn or whatever, can decline quite rapidly and be very challenged to provide for the young people. This also looks at innovative solutions, cross-sectoral solutions. We're very aware of the current objectives around shared education, the programme for government to target around shared education, and trying to take all of that on board. And we're relevant, and some colleagues cover areas within the touch of the border and potential cross-border issues as well. The area planning process, as members will be aware, one of the first parts of this was around what was then called the viability audit, which we know caused significant issues. I'm pleased to say that we now talk about an annual profile of schools, and certainly the information that annual profile brings is very, very useful in terms of informing planning and making sure it is an ongoing and an iterative process. I think the other thing we would want to stress in the process is that it is about working with schools. And certainly in the lead-in to the process of reaching the area plan for primary, there was a significant amount of consultation with schools. There were opportunities for schools to make submissions to try to influence how area planning went forward. I certainly know in my own area that there were schools who met together and made joint submissions, and I'm sure I know that's been replicated in other places. And I suppose in some senses one could get the impression from some of the media coverage and so on that this has almost been something that's happened by a number of people sitting in darkened rooms around the province. I just want to reassure members that there has been a tremendous amount of interaction with schools and also between the various authorities as we move forward. And obviously as part of that then, as the draft area plan came forward, that was then put out to public consultation, and prior to the actual formulation of the area plans that are currently in place, there was a very significant public consultation and analysis of public consultation in respect to that matter. In moving forward any proposal, we also recognise that we must, in accordance with the legislation, if there is any proposal for any change of any sort, that is very clearly subject to direct consultation initially with parents, governors and staff, and then should the managing authority be so minded to bring forward a development proposal, a 2-month period of public consultation. So it's important that that interaction is taking place with the local community. Partnership is a feature of all of that, and certainly one of the great benefits I think that's come through from area planning is the fact that the 5 education library boards as the area planning authorities, working very closely with colleagues in CCMS and also interacting with colleagues in other stakeholder groups, NICE, CNG, etc. And that has now been formalised in a sense, so that's another very tremendous benefit. Focusing then in on the primary sector itself, and I think it is important that we recognise the distinctive features of the primary sector. First of all, the age group of the children involved is a very significant issue, because you're planning for provision for children as young as 4 years of age, and their portability and travelability is obviously very different to a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old. So it's thinking in terms of that, recognising, as we do across our province, the core place of primary schools in communities and the links with communities, and making sure that that is something that due attention is paid to, and also recognising for most of the education library boards there's a huge rural aspect to what we do. Certainly once you move outside the city of Belfast, certainly all of the other boards would have a significant proportion of rural schools, and we do recognise the importance of a primary school in a rural community. We also acknowledge in terms of the profile of schools that in terms of what presents in the primary sector when you analyse that, it really is significantly around this issue of unfilled places and the use of resources. We recognise that the primary schools, by and large, across Northern Ireland are managing their budgets very effectively. We recognise that they are doing very well academically, despite the challenges of getting detailed information around the levels of progression and so on. But when we look at the international comparators, we see a very good performing primary sector. And also looking at, in primary particularly, where there's a very local dimension to schooling, the opportunities for shared education, and recognising that that very often is something that grows from community and comes from a bottom-up model. And we have many examples through various initiatives and projects where, coming out of those, there has been a growing relationship between schools, which has led to a desire to move forward in a shared way. And we recognise for many, particularly in the rural community, many small villages which would have schools of different types that perhaps because of demographic downturn are struggling, but by working together there's the potential actually to take quality education forward. As I say, we have a regional approach to future planning. We work together as 5 boards and CCMS, and linking with our colleagues in other areas. And that's reflected, I think, in the nature of the plans. And members will obviously have observed that in the terms of the statements that are made in the plans, they are common statements really around 4 categories of statement. There are schools which are quite clearly sustainable and viable moving forward, and the statement that would attune to those schools in the plan is that no action required at this particular time. There are other schools where perhaps there are some issues emerging, and again there's a category there we've said, keeping the school under review on an annual basis, where there perhaps is a trend of enrolment change or other issues that are emerging. We also have a category that's common to all of our plans around exploring a range of options. That includes options which have grown up locally, perhaps around possible federations, confederations, shared education partnerships, etc., etc. And again, in the plans you will see a number of actions which are around exploring those possibilities. And then obviously there would be a very small number, and it is a very small number of schools across the province where there are very real stresses. And again, I would stress that the key point around looking at that is around the ability of a school to make educational provision for the young people. And we recognise that given the plethora of that have to be covered in a school, and also the wider experiences that I referred to earlier, that when it gets to the point where a school is very, very small, it's very challenging to give the young people those experiences, and yet those young people have to move forward in a wider societal sense. So it's recognising, yes, there are a very small number of primary schools that are in the plans subject to review, but I stress again that that review process is a process of consultation and a process of engagement with the school and the community in seeking the best way forward for the children's education. Members will be aware of the development planning process which occurs, and again I stress that's a further opportunity for consultation, and the Department have recently published new guidelines around development proposal process. So in conclusion, I would want on behalf of colleagues to reiterate the centrality of the child. And it's really about planning for educational provision rather than some sort of technical or bureaucratic exercise, which sometimes we recognise it can be portrayed as. But we certainly as educationalists are very driven by the fact that we are making provision for children's education, and that has to be the key driving feature. To reassure members that there is a lot going on. Again, looking at the plans and then looking at the work that's ongoing. Unfortunately, sometimes that's not publicly seen until the development proposal is published, but colleagues are heavily involved in working with local school communities, with governors, with staff, etc., around some of these issues, and particularly in the category where exploring the way forward. And there are some very interesting conversations ongoing around shared education options, around confederation options, and other ways of making sure we secure the education for the young people. And I suppose we would recognise as officers of the boards and CCMS that there are certain perceptions out there about area-based planning, and sometimes it's quite difficult to unpack some of those, but we welcome the opportunity to share with yourselves today some of the background detail around how the plans came about and the process of taking the plans forward, and again stressing that we have that particular focus on making provision for young people's education.
Thank you very much, Ray. Would you be in a position to tell us how much this process has cost the boards and CCMS to date?
Obviously, our colleagues may open up. I mean, the process really is being done within existing resources, and as members will be aware, those have been diminishing resources. But certainly, in terms of additional costs, I'm not aware of any significant additional costs. It would have been really from within the means of the boards and CCMS. Obviously, the main resource that would have been towards this would be a staffing resource, but other colleagues may wish to comment.
I think, agreeing with what Ray has said, maybe just to point out that the Department of Education have actually confirmed within the last month additional staff resources specifically for area-based planning.
Maybe if I could just comment, I agree that the Department has approved additional resources, but it is only approval. Those additional resources have not actually materialised as yet, and being realistic, it is unlikely that they will materialise in the immediate future, which means that to a large extent the area planning process is being delivered very significantly, I would believe, with limited resources. And I think that what the boards and CCMS and the other employing authorities have achieved in the last year or 18 months is quite significant, given the fact that the resources needed do not match the resources available.
Okay, well, one of the reasons why I'm asking that is because the department had made an unsuccessful bid in June Wandering for £1.4 million to assist, obviously, in resource for area planning, and obviously if they're bidding for that, then there must have been a need for it. So, and if that need's not being met, then obviously it's coming from the boards, and I was just concerned that that may then be affecting other services within the boards.
Okay. Maybe I'll comment on this one. Sorry, can I start with an apology that I'm not who was supposed to be here, Nick Bride. He unfortunately had a call off, so I'm the last one to substitute, hopefully an able substitute. But one of the sides we've had over the years, and I've made a point several times to the committee, area planning is not an event. It's part of the process that's ongoing in terms of how we operate. It doesn't sit aside. It looks in terms of how we plan for education. The bigger thrust over the past few years has been because of the changing demography and the whole indication of that. But also, you have a greater expectation in terms of parents about what education can provide, the range of service provided by the boards, etc. So the nature of schools has had a change over that period of time. So while we can deal with area planning in terms of putting resource to actually facilitate the development planning process, etc., the actual process of carrying on planning for education is a total area, so it's not possible to separate out from a particular side. Slight different case maybe from CCMS, who have a different function than the boards in terms of delivery. So within the boards, it's part of our totality of services, and as such, it just restricts how we can progress those if there's less money available. So if we have more money available, we're actually able to spend more time in terms of wider consultation, in terms of developing new options. Because when you look at an area like shared education, other areas like that, like Ray referred to, they require an intense amount of support for the schools who are undertaking it. And that's not just purely financial, it's actually people and time for those particular schools. So, you know, it's not a part you can just separate it up and say this is area planning. It's part of our core function, but without the money, we're not able to progress just as quickly as we would like to. I think it's probably the case.
Could I just ask each of you, because obviously Ray has spoken for the group, but could I just ask each of you in turn just to maybe tell me what you've been trying to achieve within your own areas and what lessons that you've learnt to date through this process?
In the Western Board, we have actually been, I suppose, really before area-based planning really ever started, we were always looking at primary schools, and we had a group called the Controlled Schools Working Group, which we have since strengthened, and that has always been looking at, at primary schools. So as a result, when area-based planning came along in the control sector, we had a substantial amount of work done, if you like, with the result that presently we have recently closed 2 schools and amalgamated them into one in the Tyrone area. That's the latest one, and we really don't have any plans on the present strategic plan to close or rationalise any more primary schools in the Western Board. However, as the plans are reviewed year on year, they may throw up, that we need to rationalise further. But at the moment in the control sector, we're not planning to do so. I suppose one of the areas into which we're moving in the Western Board is the area of shared education, and we have two schools in Woodbury, namely the Control School and the Maintain School, and they're looking about becoming a shared school. So we're presently working on that project, and on the first call for shared proposals, it did get through, but obviously we're hoping that it will next time with a few minor adjustments. So as far as the Western Board is concerned, I think that's really where the thrust of our work will be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in terms of the Southern Education and Library Board, our context is very much of a rural board. We have 222 primary schools across all sectors. 87 of those would be schools with less than 105 pupils, i.e. below the threshold. Our concern, therefore, is for the small rural primary schools and the education of children within those schools. By and large, the primary schools in the control sector do not represent a concern financially in comparison to, or in contrast to, the post-primary sector. In terms of education, they're performing well. We have only one school of those 222 in formal intervention. And the issue of enrolment is one that is heightened and highlighted by the area-based planning process. But as Ray had said earlier on, this process is one that puts education first and foremost, and our concern with the very small primary school is the educational experience that the child would receive in that school. We are also concerned about the effects on community of the removal of a small rural primary school from a community. That came through very strongly in the public consultation on the board's draft area plan back in 2013, and we're very conscious of that. Rosemary has mentioned the shared education, and in the Southern Board area we have one of the three approved schemes. That's in Moy, in Tyrone. That's St John's Primary School in Moy and Moy Regional Primary School. We've worked closely with colleagues in CCMS on that proposal, and it perhaps serves to indicate the wishes of the community, because it has come from the community, not from the board and not from CCMS. The two schools wish to preserve their identity and ethos, but they wish to come together onto a single campus. That offers opportunities for efficiency in terms of school buildings and facilities, but it also offers potentially a model for other schools in similar small communities where you have a maintained school and a controlled school, and it's in the interest of the community not to see one of those schools disappearing. So we're working, as I said, with colleagues in CCMS and with the schools on that shared education project, and we will be interested to see how that develops. But very much from our own point of view, it is the small rural primary school that is at the focus of issues in primary area-based planning in the Southern Board.
In terms of the North Eastern Board, in organisational terms, in addition to our liaison with other bodies, we would have a body called a Strategic Management Unit, which I chair, which involves a range of disciplines within the board, because we've always traditionally had a very strong view that provision is an educational issue. It's not a property issue. Property is there to serve provision for education. So we have a Strategic Management Unit which has had ongoing work, as I stressed earlier, over a number of years, common with the other boards. In terms of specific work around the primary sector at the moment, we'll be looking at round about eight or so projects where we're exploring the opportunity for shared education. And again, as Mike has said, it's very much in the rural communities where two schools working together have said, well, you know, we need to find a way to maintain education in this rural community because of the way it serves this community. And we've some very examples. I was with the committee on a previous occasion around our project on PIE, promoting integrated education, and we have a number of very successful projects there where the focus was very much in that project on the local nature of it. And rather than sharing with a school that's 25 miles away, you don't have to meet people every day. It was within villages where people were meeting each other, and a focus on governors and a focus on parents. And we've seen tremendous strides come forward, and actually working out of that, some of the proposals coming forward from schools were actually, we want to build on this and we want to more formally take it forward. We also would have a number of within our plan and our work programme for this year of exploring one of the interesting features, while we have a fairly rural population as well, the unfilled places issue is really a big issue within urban areas. So if you look at some of the big towns within our area, you would find a number of primary schools in those big towns with perhaps technically, in terms of the current calculation, up to 100 to 150 unfilled places. Now, again, as I stressed earlier, we recognise that the curricular demands on primary schools means that their usage of space is very different. So we are looking, again, because it's grown up from the schools themselves, at about 4 or 5 possible opportunities to look at things like federations and working together to maintain a presence perhaps in a housing estate area, even though the school may not be full, and again, not in the close distance other schools which have a similar challenge. We would have, again, a very small, I think it's only really about 2 in our work programme for this year. We're actually doing a significant review of the potential future of provision, and again, as I stressed earlier, that is driven by the educational issues now, and as we always say, and we're very proud to be able to say that it's not an issue over the quality of provision that's being made by the teachers in the area. It's really around the stress on those teachers to meet the whole curriculum. So a number of very significant pieces of work that are being taken forward, and certainly we would see perhaps even further bids to the Shared Education Campus programme emerging out of that.
Thank you.
Okay. I had an interesting switch when I moved from the southern to the southeastern in terms of the makeup of my schools. In the southeast, we have much fewer rural schools than we would have had in the southern. We had a small number of schools like that. But also, the southeast had been involved in area planning since about 2000. And they had produced regional plans now. So you look at areas like around Lisburn, and there has been a rationalisation in a number of areas. So there had been a strong programme of that. So when we came to look at the primary as opposed to the post-primary, we actually had a very, very small number of schools, and it was largely about looking at areas and actually taking an area plan, looking at them. So, for example, Bangor, we had a problem ongoing in Bangor that we would had oversubscription in a number of schools regularly, and we had other schools where we had a large number of surplus spaces. So we took an overview of the total plan in that area, and we looked at all the schools and decided to sort of work in policy for large towns or cities when it comes to those particular areas. And that was really to say that in an urban area, we would look at schools that were multiples of 7, so either 1 class entry, 2 class entry, 3 class entry. And we then looked at the total provision and worked towards that. That meant reducing some schools in terms of the powers. So, for example, we reduced Killeen, Clanleyboy, and we looked at the other. So we took a total aerial look at it. The other big trend we've had in terms of the South East is because we border in Belfast, we work very closely with the Belfast Board, so we now meet on a bi-monthly basis. Belfast ourselves look at all schools along the corridor in the primary sector. Robert, I'll let you come in a minute. And one of the other big areas switching out has been where we've had change in the population. So you look at an area like Carryduff. Carryduff has changed dramatically in terms of the makeup over the past number of years. So there has been an increasing rise for areas such as the integrated sector and the maintained sector. So there's been a big switch there in terms of Millennium has just been approved to double to country. So we have a different approach for different areas. But getting back to what Mike said, there are very, very few schools that we've actually got proposals that we need to actually look at. We've one that is caused largely by the shift in the army battalions and the knock-on effect from that. And with others, we're actually looking about maybe reducing numbers again and increasing other numbers to give us, like the areas we're talking in terms of ARDS, where there's some schools looking to increase their numbers, some schools looking to reduce them, similarly in terms of Lisburn. So it's a global package we're looking at, which we take on board what's coming forward up from the schools, and that's really where we're up to.
Thank you. Malachy?
Well, we're in a slightly different position from the boards in that we are responsible for planning the provision of Catholic maintained schools right across the north of Ireland. So our approach might be slightly different. However, it would be fair to say that since its inception, CCMS has always been involved in school rationalisation programmes. Now, historically, they would have involved amalgamations, which inevitably would have involved school closures. And the purpose of those amalgamations would have been to address issues such as building deficiencies, hopefully getting a new school built as a result of the amalgamation, and also trying to reduce the single-sex provision that existed within the Catholic maintained sector. And we've been very successful in doing that. When area planning came onto the table, we established an area planning team which consists of five people. There are 2 professional officers, and then the rest of the team are admin staff. And we took the approach that we would review all of our 2-teacher schools and also revisit those areas where there have been conversations taking place about rationalisation. We have completed the review of all of our 2-teacher schools, and in the past 18 months we have been involved in over 50 consultation exercises, bringing forward a variety of proposals to the local communities. And I would want to point out here that we need to dispel the preconception that the consultation exercises are merely a rubber stamping exercise, because there have been occasions when we have brought a proposal to a local community, we have received their responses, and as a result of that the proposal has actually changed. So it's important that communities do understand that the consultation process is exactly that, a consultation process. We're now at a stage where we have a significant number of proposals now underway, consultations taking place, development proposals published, and we're now awaiting decisions from the Minister. And we're now at a stage where we have identified our 3-teacher schools, and we're going to begin a process of reviewing the 3-teacher schools. We believe that once we get that done, it'll be a matter then of looking at the area plan and continuing to implement the planning statements that are included in that area plan for each of the schools. We have no intentions at this stage to look at 4-teacher schools, because we believe that a school that has 4 teachers can deliver the curriculum, the Northern Ireland curriculum, and also provide a variety of activities that contribute to the broader educational experience of the child. And there are also certain conditions within the various policies around the number of year groups within composite classes that we think can be resolved with 4 teachers in the school. In terms of shared education projects, we actually are in discussions and actually working alongside all the boards at the moment, bar the South Eastern board. So we have projects up and running with regard to shared education in the North Eastern, the Western, the Southern, and in Belfast. We have had lengthy conversations over the past period of time with the South Eastern Board. It just happens to be that in that area no meaningful proposals have come from the bottom up that we feel we could take forward, and it's very, very important that with regard to shared education, it's a bottom-up approach. You asked what we had learned. Well, some of the things we have learned is the degree of challenge involved in this work. It is hugely challenging, and I don't think that can be understated. It's not an exercise that we can approach from a cold, bureaucratic point of view. We need to take on board the position that these schools have within local communities and be aware of that. And finally, what I would say is that I think there's a very, very significant lack of understanding within the community generally of what the area planning process is actually about. And I think there's an onus on the Department of Education to address that particular issue.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask you, just because you were the last speaker, but what support you would give to Catholic maintained schools who wish to transform to integrated status?
That is not a responsibility that we have. Our responsibility is to ensure the provision of Catholic maintained schools. There are processes that a school would go through if, for example, we have one at the moment, Clinty Clay Primary School, which we are proposing to close. The local community there have taken steps to publish their own proposal to transform to controlled integrated status. And in that instance, that responsibility lies solely with that group, taking advice from the integrated sector. We would have no input whatsoever into that particular process.
Okay, so you'll not comment then on you won't comment on the proposal?
Well, we may comment on the proposal if we're asked to comment on the proposal.
But you'll not be giving any support?
But we wouldn't be giving any support directly to the school because there is a process that NICE has to go through that particular.
If I could maybe just add to that, Chair, there is a specific process because, again, there is the mechanic of transformation to a controlled, integrated from a controlled, and again, there is a process laid out by department guidelines. In fact, I have one school at the moment that Mr. Kinahan I know very well, which is going through that process, which involves an external body, the Electoral Reform Society, balloting the parents to see if there's a wish to move in that direction, and then immediately moving to the publication of a development proposal for public consultation. And as I say, I have one very live example of that just as we speak.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Craig.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Just on the Chair's last point there, Malachi, because I'm interested in what you say, that you take nothing to do with the process. But I think as members of this committee, we're all aware who the trustees of properties are around this. So will ultimately the trustees or yourselves take that property away from them if they go integrated?
Not necessarily, because the process that we would go through is we have a proposal out to close a school. If the Minister approves that process, the responsibility for that building then rests with the trustee, and the trustee takes the decision around what would happen to that building. Now, if the trustee came to us and spoke to us about the local community wanting to transform from maintained to integrated, we would certainly advise the trustee in relation to the use of the building.
It'd be a big step for the bishops now.
It certainly would.
To be honest with you, I want to move on to the control sector because Melda Clare Mayhan is sitting 2 boards of governors in the control sector. What's the actual definition of control sector? How do you define it?
Well,
It's a
defined within legislation.
legislation as a management type, which is a controlled school, and that's its specific definition within the 86 order.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And is it defined tightly as just controlled schools?
Yes.
Non-denominational?
Yes, non-denominational. There's sometimes a misconception that a controlled school has a particular constituency, but actually a controlled school is a non-denominational school.
The reason I'm asking, there's an interesting line to see in page 171 of what the department has said to us around area planning, where it's defining the control sector, and it says it also includes integrated control schools, and it also includes integrated medium sector schools as well. Is you aware of that?
Yeah, I think, again, if I can comment, yes, there are controlled schools, and as I referred to a moment ago, there's a process to transform to become a controlled integrated school. And the Irish medium sector there, I think, is one example of an Irish medium school that has transformed to become a controlled school. I know certainly in my area, I'm dealing with another Irish medium school currently who wishes to transform to become a controlled school.
How does, what I'm really interested in here, how does that then translate into your area planning? If they're all seen as controlled sector schools, are they all treated equally?
All schools are treated in relation to their particular circumstances at the time. And I mean, I think when you're talking about equally, whether controlled, integrated, we would look at each school and we'd look at the particular issues out in terms of the area planning part, whether it was controlled integrated, whether it was Irish medium, whether it was maintained integrated, wherever. From a planning point of view, we will look at them all in a similar vein.
I have a very good, and I think you'll know what I'm coming to here, Gregory. I have a good reason for asking this, because ultimately I've seen integrated schools appear out of nowhere and have a major detrimental impact on other schools in the area. In fact, if you looked at it from an educational point of view, you would actually never have approved the school at all, because there was actually no rational need for it. So if they're all called controlled, when you're looking at your area plans, are they all treated on an equal basis, or is there a bias towards the integrated sector?
The process of area planning takes account of the needs of the community, the wishes of the community, and the planning responsibilities of the board. So when you look at a particular area, if there is a proposal coming forward for an integrated school, you've got to look at that, you've got to consult on that and the impact of it. Now, within the Good Friday Agreement and within a range of other things, there's an emphasis within the department to actually promote and support the integrated sector. So that's put into the legislation part. But from a board point of view, we've got to look at the totality. And if a proposal comes forward from the integrated sector, we've got to look at that, how it has an impact on other schools, but very much what the parents will be looking for in terms of that. Right? And quite often that is the case, where you've actually got a demand demonstrated by enrolment. And I mean, the particular case that you're referring to, there is an area where it has doubled, but over the previous 5-6 years, there was an ongoing growth within that school, demonstrated by parents actually making that preference and actually stating they wanted their children to have that type of education. The board have got to take account of that in terms of the planning part, but they do that within a part where they would consult with other schools about the impact. Now, one of the interesting facts in terms of South East is there are more pupils within South East controlled integrated schools than there are within grant integrated, because the board took a line that where there was that demand that could be facilitated through transformation, it was done so. So it's a question, you look at all the local circumstances and you make a decision, but it is very much driven by where the demand and the interests of the parents are expressed through their preferences at admissions.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, because I know there is this thing in the Good Friday Agreement about the integrated sector. You know, as boards, the biggest percentages of the schools you're actually responsible for are the control sector. What's done to promote that sector?
The board regularly promote control sector, but the boards have a dual function, as defined within the legislation. We are the planning authority for all schools. We're charged under the order to ensure that there's adequate provision for all children and young people. So there is that particular part. This has been recognised by the Minister in the formation in the new dispensation for a control school working group. So the board have got to support their own schools as they do, but they also the planning authority. So that has been recognised, that duality is a difficult delivery mechanism, and that is where you'll see within the new legislation there has been the facility provided as part of the Minister's announcement that he will have a control school working group, and we'll be very supportive of that, because it is very difficult to actually perform those two functions, but we do to the best of our ability over the years.
You know, I thank you for your honesty around that, and I concur. I actually agree with the sectoral body being set up for the control sector. You've already touched on this, and I hate it coming back to you, Gregory, all the time here, but obviously you're close to my heart in Lisburn.
I get worried about that.
What actually, well, that just means I'm continually on the phone to you, pestering you. What is going to be done around the issue of increasing enrolments within the Lagan Valley area? And this goes back to the heart of area planning, or as I honestly think, lack of planning, because we had an ongoing row for 3 years over the preschool facilities being bursting at the seams in Lagan Valley. That doesn't seem to have been reflected in any increase in enrolment in the primary school sector. On top of that, you then had a major influx of army families coming in, and the need to increase enrolment in a number of schools was obvious, but it never took place, and has led to major displacement of children not only right throughout Lisburn town, but further afield. Is that being looked at, and is that going to be rectified for next year? Because it is causing mayhem out there.
Yeah, I mean, I referred earlier to the situation we done in Bangor. We're carrying that out in Newton Ards, and literally from last Friday I was out and about in Newton Ards schools. Our next part is Lisburn. Now, the reason Lisburn, and I want to be careful I don't actually name schools in terms of the part, but in Lisburn we have a number of schools where there is over-subscription. We have a number of schools where traditionally has been under-subscription. And when you're looking at a town area, as once quoted by Minister, Bangor is not a metropolis, neither is Lisburn a metropolis. And there is a actual issue.
Lisburn representatives might disagree with you.
There is an issue.
It's a city.
City in a wider part, but we'll discuss that later. But one of the sides is we have spare capacity in certain areas. Lisburn is a town very much divided in terms of social and economic issues, and there are certain choices of schools in certain areas that maybe are more attractive to parents. So we've got to look at Lisburn as a totality. I'm not saying more than that.
Yeah. Also, Gregor, just a last touch with yourself. When we looked at shared education, I know everybody seems to get this impression when as a committee we were thinking of shared education, it was very much between the controlled sector and the maintained sector. Not necessarily. And we've touched on this thing about rural schools being smaller. That doesn't necessarily mean, actually, some of the educational outputs of the smaller schools are better than the larger schools. And I've seen that locally at my own primary school. Shared education also means sharing of, say, management and other facilities between local primary schools to ensure that smaller primary schools can also be maintained in that community. Are all of the boards looking at that aspect of shared education?
Well, can I comment just in terms of our own, and then I'll let pass on my colleagues. At the minute, you're probably aware we have a situation going on where Glasswater and Kilnay actually share a principal, and we have a short self-federation within that particular part. That's one particular model we've developed. But one of the biggest changes that you're getting with schools, really, if you go back to 2004, when Barry Gardner made this statement about the pressure in terms of schools and budgets when we had a decline in the population. But since the population have stabilised, schools have actually started to develop increased cooperation amongst themselves. So you're having informal federations of schools formed through the principals, etc. So there's a mix between those that would be informal and working together arrangements where, for example, you share maybe a music teacher, PE teacher, technician, etc. And the more formalised part, which we would call soft federations, where you actually share a principle but maintain your own identity. Because in rural areas, identity becomes a very important part of the equation. But at the same stage, if you have a shared principle, it means that you've actually got the ability to do certain things across those committees. So we've worked that example. I know there's a range of other examples across the board to them.
Yes, if I can add, again, I referred earlier to the fact that a number of the things that we're looking at, even within our work programme for this year, are around schools from the same management type who are in relatively close proximity, but there's quite a significant unfilled capacity issue around there. And again, we're looking to explore options on the way forward to maximise the opportunities for young people, and as Gregory has said, to recognise that even within a town, one estate can be very distinctively different to another, and therefore it's not just as simple as logic on a drawing board would say 3 schools with 100 and odd spare places between them, put them all into one school. But actually, where do you locate that school? And if one estate is a different distinctive flavour than another, and it's looking and exploring those models that are not simply, as I say, across the religious divide, but also single identity issues or single management type issues rather than single identity. And again, from our point of view, as I quoted earlier, we have a number of projects we're exploring at the moment of schools within the controlled sector in the North Eastern Board, looking at different models of working together, and we're going to spend some significant time and energy evaluating that as a precursor to moving forward.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And before Mike comes in, I'm actually going to speak to Mike about an issue here. I just think as the purse strings get tighter, that aspect of, especially amongst primary schools, will become more and more important. And lastly, Chair, you'll be glad to hear this. Mike, it was all over the newspapers yesterday. Dromore Central Primary School, brand new school, being built, planned, God bless us, has been in the planning for almost 10 years now, a decade or more. Glad to see that it's finally moving ahead. Welcome that. But ultimately, it's going to be built too small, 2 classrooms short. Now, we can't turn children away. You hear this thing about parental choice. It's a successful school in an area where there's more kids than actual places in the school. That's not going to change. So are we going to build a brand new primary school and ultimately have portable classrooms sitting outside the front door before it ever opens?
Okay.
Is that not a waste of public resources?
In responding, John, I don't want to get into commenting on one school. I will set it within a context.
Well, the principle.
Yes.
I'm talking about the principle here.
Yes, the principle is that we would look at an area in terms of need, in terms of birth statistics in the wards around the school, pupil distribution historically and going forward. In the Dromore area, there are a number of wards where the birth rate has actually fallen, and the average for the wards in the Dromore area is -20%. In the Southern Board area, I spoke earlier on about the context, the rural context. One of the other main features of the context for area planning in the Southern Board is growth, pupil growth. Now, we have 6 district council areas currently. 5 of those on the department's needs model show growth. One that doesn't is Banbridge District Council area, in which Dromore is situated, and that actually shows a deficit over the next 11 years. So it is not a simple question of projecting growth in general terms. We need to look specifically at the areas. In terms of Dromore, we also need to look at the needs of the schools immediately outside Dromore, 2 of which have actually had development proposals for growth and extension approved by the Minister within the last 12 months. So we're looking at the pupil distribution as a whole. The school that is being built has actually been built according to the department's policy and the board's analysis, and that analysis shows that what is being built is sufficient for the needs of the school at this time.
Thank you, Chair. I did promise that was the last one.
Mr Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank the members for coming today and the very able substitute that has attended. Could I just make a point, Chair? I was surprised to the question asked by the Chair in terms of the cost of area planning, and the answer was basically it's all being done within resources, so we don't know the cost of it. If we had gone to ESA, my understanding is area planning would have moved on to a legislative basis then. So that's number one point. And then secondly, you'd made a bid for additional funds. So if you don't know the cost, yet you're going to move to a legislative basis, and then you made a bid for more funding, I have to say that doesn't sound like it's a very professional approach.
Thank you for the question. I'll try to clarify. In response to the Chair's question, really what we were indicating is within existing resources. So there is a cost, but it's within existing resources. And in terms of seeking to move forward, obviously the speed by which you can address things, and there is a very serious imperative here, because when you're looking at moving forward, and particularly in the current circumstances where there's incredible budget pressures and so on, you're trying to make sure the best provision for children is there. It's about forward planning, and I suppose our bid for additional resources was a recognition, I think as the Chair indicated, that we have other things to do as well, and therefore the pace at which we can address area planning issues is very much dictated by the availability of the human resource. And I think as Mike said, or no, sorry, Malachy said, it is incredibly intensive. It is incredibly intensive, even in terms of our duty, where there is a proposal to move forward, to actually consult with parents, with staff and governors, etc., etc. All of that is very time intensive, but it's absolutely critical to be out there talking to people face to face. Sometimes those are difficult conversations, and sometimes we're not the most popular people in the world. But the bid for additional resources was around trying to move things forward at a faster pace than the current resource level, in the context of all the other jobs we have to do, is possible too. So I hope there's no contradiction in that.
I just felt the grounds for moving forward, and whilst I agree with everything you've said in terms of that, didn't seem to be the grounds, the support mechanism there was that
Apologies
professional
if
in
I
the
didn't
way
make that
that it had been done. I have to say, I mean, I don't think anybody could argue against area planning and planning in general. And the comment was made about it was planning for a purpose. And looking at the criteria, the area planning process is designed to, and you have 5, 6, whatever it is, criteria there that you have listed. There is no aspect of that that is about savings of money. So we accept that it's not about saving money, right? It is about educational experience and educational outcomes. How are we measuring that at this moment in time then, and what has been the success or otherwise of area planning to date then in educational experience or outcomes?
I'll just everyone to answer all the questions.
Well, to a certain extent, it's very early days at the moment to see what the impact of area planning is actually going to be. It's a very time-consuming process. You can be talking about a period of 18 months to 2 years from the initial meetings taking place at a local level to actually having a ministerial decision. So I would suggest that in terms of the small number of closures of small schools, for example, and the amalgamation of schools, I think it's too early in the process to actually say what the impact that will be. I certainly do know from experience that with some amalgamations that have taken place in the past few years, the breadth of experience offered to children has certainly increased in terms of the extracurricular activities that would be offered to children who are coming from a small school and they maybe didn't have the opportunities to engage in those type of activities. In terms of the impact that area planning is going to have on raising standards, as I say, I think it's too early in the process to actually comment on that or to measure that at this point in time.
Chair, could I come in at this point, just with regard to that point? My experience in the Western Board is, whilst I agree it is, yes, very early, our experience is that when you rationalise the school, the Education and Training Inspectorate come in quite quickly after the rationalisation, and at that stage you get a baseline. And I would imagine then that over a period of 3 or 4 years, you know, when they return again, you start to be able to measure pupil outcome, and then you're able to make decisions as to the advantages of the rationalisation.
It's been a very controversial area.
Yeah.
So at this stage, even though it may be,
Yeah.
we have no idea whether it's successful or not.
No.
Well, anecdotally, from the point of view of parents, you very often find that the individuals who are slowest to change are the parents, because they obviously are concerned about their children. And where you do, for example, an amalgamation, very soon after the amalgamation actually taking place, you do begin to hear comments coming through from parents that it has been the right thing to do, their children are happy, why didn't it happen sooner, and so on. So anecdotally, we have evidence in the sense that points to the process being successful. But if you want to actually measure it, as I say, in terms of raising standards in schools, I do honestly believe that it's too soon in the process to comment on that.
Comment was made about consultation on the area plan and the amount of detail that has gone into there. Can I make 2 comments? I refer to South Eastern Education and Library Board first, where Gregory made the point about the consultation of the schools along the corridor in East Belfast, which really wasn't happening. And really, it's only very recently that consultation started to take place between South Eastern and Belfast, reference the Newton Breda, Knockbreda situation. And I know of examples, Gregory, where parents were being told one thing, yet the parents, the principals of schools were not aware of those comments being made to parents, to the schools. That really was, from where I'm sitting, from where many parents are sitting, an absolute shambles of a situation.
Maybe, I mean, we're talking here this morning about primary area plans. The post-primary situation, all I can say is, I mean, the issues that you've raised have really been discussed in fairly good detail by this committee and by ourselves previously. And what I can say is that the southeast and Belfast, in terms of where the two chief executives are at the minute, we have instigated a programme, and I cannot necessarily speak about what's happening before. All I can say is what is currently happening under the two current chief executives and what we are doing in terms of the primary and the post-primary, moving things forward. So, you know, the other has had a fair airing already at previous committees, this, and also in the Assembly, and we've talked to the groupings. We've put in place measures to address that in terms of the primary, and we're looking very much at that. I will still stand over the decision we made, as the judicial review very clearly made it point that the decision was the right decision, but we'll work on in terms of working with the communities to develop it. And I say, even before part of the single board, we've looked at the fact that there are areas, so we're looking at, for example, at the minute, the primary schools along that sector where there are pressures for growth. And the chief executive of the Belfast and ourselves and our officers meet us, say, on a bi-monthly basis to look at the detail. So I can only comment on what is happening now as opposed to what happened in the past. And I think we all learn lessons from area planning. And this particular one, I think we have learnt, and we're progressing it on very satisfactorily.
Chair, if I could add a more general comment, maybe pick up on something that Malachy said. Certainly one of the real challenges we find in the whole consultation process is that, unfortunately, the myths and legends that grow up, there is a tendency amongst parents, if they even hear the word that somebody's having a conversation about a school, somebody in the community is saying, "Did you hear that school's closing?" And then suddenly you find some parents moving children to other schools because they've heard a rumour at the shops or somewhere else, and that is a challenge. And it's back to the point that that Malachy made around the evidential base across all of the 5 boards, that there have been significant changes made as a consequence of the feedback to consultation. But certainly I would want to put on record that one of the greatest challenges we face is the perceptions that people have around consultation, and that, you know, as officials and our colleagues who do the face-to-face work, you know, it's all kind of a sham, and the decisions already made and so on and so forth, is a challenge for us all.
Would you mind if I brought Mr McCausland in, as he's moving to another committee duty, so just very quickly.
It's just to pick up on the point, thank you very much, Chair. The issue of perceptions in people's minds of once it's even talked about. But if you turn to some of the reports here, it says a certain school, subject to a proposal, development proposal, is to close. So in other words, when people see that, they will just assume, well, that's it, done, dusted. They'll just see that as a formality. And they don't feel at all, I think in many cases, that they've actually been consulted or involved in that. They don't feel that their views have been represented through to the board. How do you deal with that? Because, I mean, it occurs in a number of areas here, and it names schools and says it is to close, subject to a proposal, yes, but it is already proposed. So how do you deal with that? Because once that happens, you get flight, people will go. Absolutely. And yet there has been no proper process of consultation.
Through the Chair, can I address from a Southern Board perspective, but I know it is common to the other boards. Before anything is printed or released in public in an area plan, it has actually been subject to consultation with the schools. So there would be ongoing discussions with schools prior to any statement being made in the area plan. The area plan is simply stating what is being proposed, and the member is quite correct in saying that. However, that is partway through a process with the school. It is not the end of the story. As several colleagues have already said, there is no predefined outcome to this, and in fact there are numerous examples where a proposal has not gone forward because of the response to consultation. So there is a local consultation and there is a public consultation, both of which are formalised in the development proposal process. But it's to maybe reassure members that prior to an area plan being published, with intentions in that those have been talked through with schools and with boards of governors.
Okay, thank you.
Just to say that in compiling the area plan, CCMS worked very, very closely with the Education Library Boards, and that was one of the most significant challenges, the use of language within the area plans. And we tried, the boards and ourselves tried very, very hard to couch proposals in soft language, but at the end of the day, the purpose of the area plans was to actually identify what course of action was being planned. So in that case, it's very, very difficult to avoid the use of words like closure, amalgamation, or whatever that happens to be. And that was a very difficult. It was a difficult decision to make. But from our perspective, from the start of 2012, when the area planning began to kick in fully, we were in constant contact with our schools about what was being discussed and what was going to appear in the area plans. And we undertake no piece of work in relation to any school without the principal, the chair of governors and the trustee knowing that we are actually going to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it would be helpful maybe at some point if the Belfast Board was... I understand the circumstances and appreciate the difficulty, but I think it would be helpful if there was an opportunity to talk to them.
Okay, thank you. Mr Lunn.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and thanks for your various presentations. I think you have a very difficult job. I don't envy you the task you're embarked on. But I was struck in the presentations, Ray in particular, but followed by the rest of you, that the first one that mentioned the word integrated was actually Gregory at 10:35. A lot of talk about shared, okay, but I'm glad the chair then made up for it. So, Malky, I want to ask you a question, because the answer you gave to the chair would have been a credit to any politician, frankly. Let me ask you just quite straight. If a Catholic maintained primary school, if the parents of that school decided they wanted to transform to integrated status, overwhelmingly, CCMS would obviously be a major consultee. Are there any circumstances, and I'm not talking about Clinty Clay and some survival mission, I'm talking about a valid, viable school which has no enrolment problems, but which decides it wants to transform the integrated status. Is there any circumstances in which CCMS would actually endorse that decision and support it?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer.
No, it's a very easy question.
No, I suppose I would answer it by saying that the statutory responsibility of CCMS is to provide for, or to ensure the provision of Catholic maintained schools. That is our responsibility. Other organisations have a responsibility to provide for integrated schools or controlled schools or wherever that happens to be. If a strong Catholic school came forward to CCMS with a proposal to transform to controlled integrated status, I think that would provide us with a significant challenge, because it has never happened, and it is something that we would have to take a view on. But I couldn't say at this point in time, in all honesty, that CCMS would endorse or not endorse that particular course of action.
That's pretty much the same answer as you gave the chair, only longer. I'll not pursue it. The impression I have is that, and you say that your obvious mission is to maintain the maintained sector, and to put it simply, I mean, you could lead on from that and say, well, what are you doing in an area-based planning process, which might involve the amalgamation of a Catholic and a controlled school, or maintaining a controlled school.
What are we doing in that area? What are we doing in that area?
Well, it's the same. It's the same thing. It's removing, and theoretically, it could be removing a maintained school because of the necessity to amalgamate. Are you saying you would support that?
I don't understand the question.
If a Catholic maintained school and a controlled school in a particular area, as you've all been talking about, in smaller areas, And the best solution was amalgamation. I don't mean a Moy solution, and I'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I mean a proper amalgamation. It seems to me you would oppose that as well.
Pursuing an amalgamation of a Catholic school and a controlled school.
Yes.
I don't actually think in legislation that's possible to do. It would probably involve the closure of one or other of the two schools.
Of course it would.
Yeah. And if we felt in a particular area that we could not argue for the retention of the Catholic school, we would be coming forward with a proposal to close that school. I don't see the point that you're trying to make.
If the salvation for primary school education in a particular, probably a rural area, was the amalgamation of two schools. Now, the Moy is a strange example, but I'll come there in a minute. But I mean a proper amalgamation, not two schools on the one site with different uniforms. I mean an amalgamation, and effectively the damaging, perhaps, of the Catholic ethos that you quite rightly treasure. What's your reaction going to be? Because it seems to me that CCMS just would not agree to this.
No, well, we would not be involved in the amalgamation of a Catholic and controlled school.
Okay.
In that instance, our process would be to propose the closure of the Catholic school, and then parents have the choice to send their children to whichever school they choose to send their children to.
Yeah.
Our responsibility is primarily to provide Catholic maintained schools.
Yeah, okay. Gregory, I'm glad you set the record straight on the particular school in Lisburn that we were discussing without naming it. Because if an integrated school can start from scratch and achieve a total of about 180 pupils in the time scale that we're talking about, despite the fact that they're operating out of a farmyard and porta cabins, I think that's a considerable success, and it's a supreme example of parental choice at its best. And the implacable opposition of some people to that particular school doesn't really do them any credit. But there's not a question there. Could I ask you all? Sorry, I've got a bit of a throat here. The needs model. What do you think would be the effect on your operation of the Drumrah judgment? I know it's perhaps more so a question for the department, but it must filter down to you, and you're the ones that are engaged in area planning, which is what Judge Tracy particularly commented on. So, have you any comment on that?
I think go back to the answer I gave you on the previous school illustrates how we practically deal with the issue. I mean, at the end of the day, the demand, as illustrated by enrolments and illustrated in terms of the available bodies and the quality of education, are the factors that drive our decisions rather than judicial decisions. We will have to live with the consequence judicially, but really, when we look at a school, we don't look at we're doing it because of A, B and C. Parents, in a particular case, were expressing a preference for that school, and if that's illustrated, we can then look at it. That's the way we would look at all schools. That would apply whether it's controlled, integrated, Irish medium, or whatever. If there is a parental demand that demonstrates it is there and it is viable in the longer term, and within the context looking at the total provision area, because I mean, you've got to look at the best use of resources. So there is that part, we'd look at it in the particular case as opposed to a global part. So it's not a question looking to say, right, every integrated school has to grow. It's a question looking and saying, right, in a particular situation, if there's a demand that can be illustrated and it can be illustrated that can be met within an area planning context, you then take account of it.
Yeah, but the current situation seems to be that the needs model as it stands assumes no growth in the integrated sector. Judge Tracy has challenged that without being absolutely definitive. So maybe we'll all end up back in court at some stage. I certainly hope we do, because I like definitive judgments. But in the meantime, I just wonder how all this filters down through the department to your operations. If I can just read you the comment from the Minister. This is December 2013 on the back of a previous judgment, McKee versus the Department. I want the Department's approach to our duties to integrate education and Irish medium, as outlined in the judgment, to be refocused. I'm not going to read it all. I want positivity in this matter. It is this positivity with which we do this I want to re-emphasise. I want to be sure, as it balances its obligations, that the Department continues to look for steps and measures that will encourage and facilitate Irish medium and integrated education. I want this positive approach to be embedded across the Department. That clearly must filter through to yourself. Where is the evidence that the boards, or perhaps the new board, is going to take on the same responsibility as a department?
I think, through the Chair, to respond to support really what Gregory said, one of the benefits of the area planning process, and we recognise there are significant challenges around predicting populations in any, no matter what model you use, and we are aware of the particular issues raised around the needs model. But ultimately, we're charged with ensuring there are sufficient places of a suitable type in an area, and that is driven very largely by the demands of the area and the parents in the area. And therefore, as Gregory has said, in a planning context, because one thing that's very clear and becomes often a very contentious issue locally is that when children move, they leave a space. And therefore, it's about the totality of the planning for the area. And you look at enrolment trends, you look at oversubscription in terms of application and other things. And in terms of bringing forward business cases for change in respect to provision, that kind of hard information has to be there. Otherwise, you're very much on a wing and a prayer. So we would look, and supporting very much what Gregory was saying, we plan on the basis of the reality on the ground and the picture that's there. And where there is a demand for any type of education, that has to be evidenced. And certainly we would try to meet our duties as they are passed down from the department in that kind of a way.
It's evidenced by polls, but particularly by parental choice in particular areas. And it just does seem to me that, and I'm not getting at anybody here, but the department has a long record of failing to facilitate and encourage, to the extent of actually being in opposition to this whole project. And what we have at the moment is a situation where you guys might decide, no, that a new integrated school here, or even the transformation of an existing one, which might draw in more pupils as a result of that, could have the potential to damage, control or maintain schools in the same area. Mm-hmm. And then Malachi will come along and say, there's no way we're going to countenance the notion of a maintained school transformed to integrated status. So it's opposition where it's supposed to be facilitation and encouragement. Mm-hmm. Somebody used the word promotion. And I just wonder where all this fits with a sensible area-based planning approach.
Could I just maybe make a comment that from the perspective of CCMS, and I'm sure this applies to the boards as well, there is certainly no inference that a particular view should be interpreted as opposition to the development of the integrated sector, because CCMS does not oppose the development of any school where the demand has been identified for provision, whether it be Irish medium, integrated, a new control school, or wherever that happens to be. So I think it would be unfair to take that inference that the boards or CCMS or any other employing authority is opposed to the development of integrated schools.
But you are. The transformation of a maintained school to integrated status as a result of overwhelming parental demand is a development. It's a development of the integrated sector, and you won't allow it.
And that can happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I make a point that from the point of view of the controlled sector, we have examples of schools, controlled schools, which have transformed both in the primary and the post-primary.
I know that, yeah.
No, what I'm saying is those were not opposed, those were actually facilitated, but the desire and the expressed will came from the school, the community of the school.
All right, I'm nearly finished, Chairman. Just did want to take up with Mike the question of the MOI.
Okay.
And it's only for information, really. I'll not go over the top about it. But how many pupils attend that school, roughly?
There's two schools involved. There's St John's Primary School and Moy Regional. St John's has about 100,
nearly 200.
And the Moy is 70s, in the 70s.
But they're coming together on the one site
Yeah.
The proposal which has been approved by the department is for both schools to come together on a single site, maintaining their separate identities and ethos, which is the will of the two schools, and for that site to enable the board as the planning authority to make efficiencies in terms of school buildings and facilities.
Yeah. Are they going to maintain their separate uniforms, assemblies, classes?
The proposal is for the schools to maintain their separate identities and ethos. How that works out will be down to the boards of governors of the schools. One point that I would make, Trevor, is that the proposal has come from the community in the Moy. It hasn't come from the board and it hasn't come from CCMS. We have engaged with both schools together over the last couple of years in listening to what they want and in assisting them to formulate that proposal. Members around the table who will have memories of the situation in the Moy 20-25 years ago in a very bad conflict situation will recognise that that proposal represents for that community an immense step forward, and we are happy to facilitate that proposal, but it must be recognised that the proposal to maintain the separate ethos and identities is the will of the community.
Yeah, it is a step forward, and I'll grant you that. But the best hope for it surely is that it will develop into something more solid and really together. Because at the moment it's actually emphasising division to me rather than emphasising cooperation. It's by the fact that they're being kept separate classes. In fact, you've still got a 70 pupil school which is operating almost completely separately.
But they have a 70 pupil school that will have the number of classrooms required for a 70 pupil school, but will have additional resources that can be shared with the neighbouring school. So in actual fact, the proposal is going to benefit the overall education of all the children involved.
And the original proposal arose from the fact that at that particular stage in the Southern Board we were proposing to close the control school provision, and the Catholic community felt they wanted to retain a control provision within the village of Moy, and the support at that stage was given by the Catholic community to retain the control school, which at that stage was 42 pupils. So there was a big drive in terms of that, and that enabled the board to actually move a voluntary playgroup from a GA pitch into the control sector. And that was because the community felt that the village was better if the two communities were retained in it. So that was where they were driven from. So it started off from the two communities, and one community saying this community is better by having both communities here coexisting. And that was the words they used back when they first started that proposal back about 8 or 9 years ago.
Okay, and obviously we'll return to this
Only
again
in Northern Ireland.
during our inquiry. We'll return to this again, obviously, during our inquiry.
Very likely. I'd say only in Northern Ireland, Chairman.
Okay.
Chair, could I make a brief comment, just conscious of time? Forgive me for repeating for those members who were members of the committee at the time when we made a presentation to the committee around the PI project. And one of the points that we emphasised, and I think it picks up on Mr Lunn's point, is that this is about communities starting from where they are at. And of course, all our hope down the road is that things will gradually change and move forward. But and I have one example in my board area. It's post-primary example where there's been a history of 25 years of sharing, and yet they still feel most comfortable going forward to maintain their own ethos, but yet quite happy to run, as they have been for 25 years, joint provision across the two schools. So I think it is about that point of bottom-up. And we do recognise, and Mike made reference to the fact that for all of us, we have different areas within our boards where the history of the area is very significant with communities. And I think it is about communities coming on board, because that's how it'll be successful, as opposed to being imposed from the top down.
Chairman, could I just make one final comment? I'm sorry.
As long as it's short, Mr.
But really, I did say at the start, what you have to do is difficult. And I think it was Malachy said that there's a challenge between bureaucratic decisions and the needs of the community. I accept all that. If you invariably take note and respect the needs, the wishes of the community, you will not end up with any less schools than what you have at the present time, because everybody values their school. You've got to make harder decisions than that, and I hope you can. I hope you can do it, and I hope you can cooperate and do it, because I don't see much evidence. But that's. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kinnan.
Thank you very much. I have masses of questions, but I'm going to find it down to one or two. And I think if I can start, I wanted to explore the sharing. But given the fact that there's less and less funding coming through to all the schools, does it mean that some of the decisions that have been made already are actually not going to happen for a while because there isn't the funding there?
A couple of things I could say. I mean, we recognise the pressures. However, members obviously will be aware of the OFM DFM initiative around shared education, which is going to provide significant amounts of funding. And again, colleagues may comment from their own board perspective. I would imagine, and I am speculating here to some degree, given where we are in this process, that some of the schools that have a history of sharing will be seeking to embed and develop that further using that additional funding. So we very much welcome the additional funding, both from Atlantic Philanthropies and also from the Department and from Government around the OFM DFM initiative, and hope that will be able to, in some ways, to obviate some of the challenges that we are facing. But others may want to.
But other schools that are sitting there expecting things to change, that actually things aren't going to change for 2-3 years, or because there's no funding coming through.
Well, the approval has been given for a number of shared education projects, and they've gone to planning stage. And just within the last 10 days or so, the call went out for the second round of bids for the shared education fund. So we would be reasonably confident that if the department approves bids, that the money will be forthcoming. But with all of these things, the process of change is very, very slow. Even if you have an amalgamation of 2 schools, the process of actually bringing that about is painfully slow.
The reason I ask that is we've seen evident all the way through the area planning process so far, not totally, but in most cases, schools of the same type amalgamating with themselves, partly because of the process, partly because of different powers that you all have, missing out on getting schools to share other than going through area learning communities or good initiatives that you've just raised. Is there any way of reviewing some of the things that we've done to make sure we get better sharing from the schools where you have got either maintained or controlled?
Certainly in terms of the projects that we've been involved in where there was a previous 4-year funding process, absolutely the case that when those relationships are built, they find ways. Now, they may not be able to do it in the way they would like to do it, but certainly our history would be in terms of the PI project, particularly in Primary and North Eastern Board, that they will continue to work together in a manner which they can do. And obviously, as I say, it may be the case, and I can't preempt this, that additional external funding from the OFM DFM signature project may be a possible way to seek to develop what already was there. And again, in the 4th year of our PI project, as reported previously to the committee, one of the really interesting developments we found was the appointment of the shared teacher. There was a teacher across a Catholic maintained school and a controlled school.
I think it's possible that we underestimate just exactly how much sharing is going on. And I mean, one of the sides is, I'm unfortunately long enough about in education to remember quite a few things, but if you look back where we were 20 years ago, where we are now, between cooperation between schools, and I'm not just talking across sector, I'm talking in totality, that has been a phenomenal growth. And over the past number of years, there's a number of the projects that happen, for example, through community relations funding, which maybe initially were very sporting and very artistic sort of part, and were very money driven. When the money disappeared, quite often it was particularly the schools carried on the relationships, because it was about teacher relationships. It's about having a shared common understanding about how they could together enable young people and people's to actually progress. So there's a lot going on right across the province now that we don't maybe necessarily see. And I mean, I quite regularly get out. I usually get out once a fortnight to do a tour of the schools in our area. And one of the sides is surprising just how often we see at events in those schools where the schools from the other community are very strongly represented at. I was at the opening of an extension in Newcastle last week, and there were 12 different schools right across the sector, of all the sectors at that, and you could see by the discussion afterwards that there's a genuine engagement in curricular delivery across those schools where people saw they were dependent on each other. And there's that dependency, which is very much part of the rural sort of farming community part, is very much coming into the schools now, where they see the need to have that interaction. So it's something that's coming because they feel it's worthwhile, as opposed to something they feel because it just happens to be the shade of opinion at that time.
Okay, and on the back of that, one of the other areas that when all the stakeholders are up in the principals, they were asking for facilitators, because most people, they know area planning is happening, but it doesn't, until it hits them, they don't affect. Are you putting facilitators on each board? I'm aware, Malachy, that I think you've got someone now coming in as a facilitator to help schools in some areas, but we need those facilitators to help promote shared education at the same time. Are you all as boards putting people in place to do that?
We're on the process of appointing staff for that.
Yeah, can I just take you up on the whole? We were looking at the inquiry into shared education, and in the Western Board, actually, there is a lot more sharing going on, perhaps, than actually we realise. Because when we look at the schools in the Western Board, we have a number of control schools that are multi-denominational in places like, Ballykelly, Culmore, and Great. And those schools have been sharing for years, but they have remained control schools with obviously a mixed community inside them, which is really a very is the natural way of doing it. We've also, through the Fermanagh Trust, then they basically have schools have been given the finances whereby that has promoted sharing between teachers and more very importantly sharing between pupils learning together. Now, in terms of the whole area learning, I can see, obviously in post-primary, you have the post-primary area learning communities where schools are very definitely sharing expertise and teachers and so forth. And my understanding is that that is going to follow through into primary. And perhaps, a lot of the work that's going on now through the Fermanagh Trust and people will develop into something like a primary area learning community. And obviously, when the money comes along for the signature project, there will be facilitators in each of the boards looking after that particular project. And my understanding is that there is a process of recruitment about to take place at this point in time. And obviously, each board will have its own facilitators, which is very, very important. But in terms of, the integrated sector in our own board and so forth, we have an example of a school that did transform, to controlled integrated status. We also have, the new controlled Irish medium school in Dungiven, which, although it's Irish medium, it's a controlled school and obviously open to all communities. And that, I think, is something that we would like to see develop there, because already the Board of Governors, has representatives from both communities. And I suppose when you move to post-primary level, you have very successful projects like in Limavady in particular, the controlled, maintained, that has been a partnership for years and obviously bearing fruit. And you're obviously aware of the sixth form project and the STEM Centre that has come about as a result of all of that sharing. And as somebody else here said, that's not only good for those two schools, that's going to have a wider impact on other schools as well. And then, of course, in the Western Board, we're looking at something which is a little bit more different again, and that is sharing across. Obviously, we have the Brala project, and we're looking to see, is there any sort of north-south cooperation in terms of Brala. So, in our response to the inquiry, we will be obviously looking at shared education, and as it's a big umbrella term, really. And maybe before we get too pessimistic, I think there's actually quite a bit going on. And we certainly have the evidence that there's a lot going on in our board.
Can I just reassure member that from the point of view of the Southern Board, we are actively engaged in recruitment using the additional resources provided by the department.
My only comment on everything else then is, would you please all put in place something that keeps schools fully up to what's going on, particularly, say, Belfast Board who aren't here, because once schools don't know what's happening, the parents then start going into the rumour mill, and it just carries on, and so it's to control the leakages and make sure that things are properly done. It's just a plea, not a question. Anyway, thank you.
Did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
I'm at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Thanks, Chair. And just following on there, Rosemary, from what you said, you know, in the needs model, you know, there's an assumption of some sort that the only growth in the Irish medium will come through the maintained sector. So there's a flaw in area planning already. In that, you know, when you particularly mention the likes of that Dungiven model.
I suppose initially in Dungiven, the majority of pupils have come from the maintained sector. But I think in the Western Board, if that's a controlled school, and by definition multi-denominational, it could well be. Now, obviously, it may take a long time. It could well be that that would be an attractive school to the Protestant community, because I am aware that in the Protestant community there are, you know, Irish people who are very good Irish-speaking people, and may, you know, wish to avail of an Irish medium education. Now, it could be very long term, but I just think it's quite an exciting project.
I think one of the sides in the needs model, Sean, maybe just pick it up, is that when it was first introduced, we looked at it with the department, and the area planning process is very much about looking at totality. So the needs-based model is part of that process that informs it. But if you look at the plans, we haven't religiously sort of done a miles exercise that says X plus Y equals Z in terms of the particular side. It provides a framework, and there are difficulties within it. But in the adaptation of the plans, we've actually looked at it as one of the pieces of evidence, but the other piece of evidence are what we are actually seeing on the ground. So there is, we have not stuck religiously to it, and the department probably shoot me for that, but I mean, that's where we're at.
Thanks. I think maybe one small point to note there is that there is interest from CNAG has been expressed in terms of control status for several Irish medium schools. So those pupils would actually come out of the control column.
Okay, thank you. And just going back to you know, in terms of our primary schools, a considerable number of our primary schools are experiencing stress. Let that be education achievement or financial stress or enrolment less than 105. But when we read a lot of the documents here, it's and seeing it on the ground, when a school is over 85 and has sufficient teachers, it really is sustainable. Why do we have to really increase the stress on schools when this bit of documentation comes out from the board, when you've got this red box, if you have 100 children in your school, you know what I mean? You know, could that not even be a yellow box?
I think, Chair, in terms of that, I think what Mr Rogers is identifying is the concerns that were there initially in what was called the viability audit, which is history as we sit. What comes out now is an annual profile statement, which is simply a statement of the factual enrolment of the school and the financial position of the school. The achievement of the school is no longer included because of all the issues around the fact that there is not a common way of measuring that presently. And I think it is to stress the point that you know, it isn't about slavishly following any dogma. It's actually about looking at the situation on the ground. In terms of, as I said earlier, in terms of the analysis across the 5 boards of the current profiles of primary schools, there are very, very, very few schools exhibiting financial stress. And in terms of enrolment, yes, there are schools against the prescribed method of measuring enrolment size, and we've touched upon the fact that, you know, we recognise that that's something that is currently being reviewed in terms of how primary schools use their available space. Because I can certainly assure you, I go into primary schools in my area, as I'm sure my colleagues do, who on paper appear to have 150 unfilled places, and you won't be able to find the empty rooms, because the foundation stage and the nature of the experience is now has spread itself out. It's great to have a music room, it's great to have an ICT suite and so on. So I think that's an area that's quite complex, but just again to provide reassurance that there's nothing any longer in the business of labelling people in the red box or whatever. It's a clear statement of fact, and it's annually reviewable, as are all these plans, because things move and change.
I think I've seen it somewhere where the stress is actually broken down a bit better than you know than.
Yep.
I think it's something like up to 46% schools are experiencing primary schools are experiencing stress, but there's figures somewhere where it breaks that down, whether it's financial or whatever else.
The annual profiles, Chair, are publicly available on each board's website.
I think it'd be useful to see the number of schools that are, say, of under 85 pupils and that as well.
That's all covered within area profiles. It's on the summary, it's somewhere in front of it.
Yeah.
Is there somewhere? Right.
It's in the summary in front for each district council area.
Can I just ask on that point then, if you redefine BAME as, is it no longer a recommendation?
I think that's the issue, that the 105 still is the accepted figure. But CCMS has argued, and I think the boards would support us in this, that in terms of sustainability, a figure of 85, 86 is more realistic. And we have tried to convince the department of that argument. And we actually have reviewed a number of schools that fall even below 85. And we have concluded that, in our opinion, those schools are sustainable. So, as my colleagues have said, we're not sticking rigidly to that figure of 105, but it's still the figure that the department.
And I think if you go back to BAME, and this is where the misconception was when BAME was published, BAME didn't actually say schools under 105 shouldn't exist. BAME said schools 105 should be reviewed. And it's an important subtlety, but it's a very important one, because when you actually look at, for example, when we refer to the figures and the rationale, we will in fact comment in relation to, for example, the P1 to P3 intake as opposed to the P5 to P7, because a school could be top heavy or bottom heavy depending on progress. So we look at them under 105, but it is not a sort of cut-off mark to say everything above that or below that, everything above that safe, everything below that's safe. Because there will be schools above 105 where we have concerns, and they have been looked at in terms of reports. So the one side would, if it was leave one message with the committee this morning about area planning, it is not a finite process. It is an iterative process which is about looking at the total factors that influence a particular area, taking account of areas like BAME, taking account of areas like the population, taking account of the local social and economic situation. So it is a total approach as opposed to somebody sitting in an office with just a pen saying, right, tick, 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 tick.
I think, as Chair, as I referred to earlier, most of us who are here this morning have very significant rural populations. I mean, again, I'm sure I'm not uncommon in saying this, that I know the reaction from many of the smaller schools in my board when that began to be talked about. And if you're sitting in a school that only has the capacity to look after 85 pupils, and you're sitting with 85 pupils making good provision for them, 105 is meaningless. It's really about the point I made at the very beginning in the opening statement. This is about making sure that the children have provision, and it's about education, and that is very different in different contexts. And as colleagues have said, you don't look at anything with a single rule. Actually looking at context, it's looking at community. I mean, I have a school in my area which has 9 pupils. It happens to be on an island. Consequently, if you were looking at that in a bureaucratic sense, you'd be saying totally unviable, totally un... However, practicalities are that actually needs to be sustained. So there's examples all around that you've got to have that flexibility, and as Gregory said, it is about planning in an ongoing way, taking account of what happens in the situation, and trying to make sure that we are driven, and absolutely driven, by making the best provision for young people's education that we can, and making sure that young people have access to a range of their entitlement in the curriculum. And also, I think it is important, as I stressed earlier, other experiences that build them as people, because we all hear in a commercial sense, in an employment sense, that it's not just your exam results that matter when you go into a career, it's all of the other skills that you bring, and those are developed through the range of experiences you get through your education, of course through your home and through your family and everything else as well.
And just comment, Rosemary, just going on from that, in terms of the questionable sustainability.
Yeah.
And particularly, I think it's in the Western Board where you look at the geographical isolation or community engagement. And really, how is that measured, and how could we, maybe in the future, when we have one Education Library Board, how can we have a consistent approach across the whole area?
Yeah, just following up on what Ray was saying there, in the Western Board there are 175 schools, and 100 of those are below the BAME threshold for rural schools of 105. So we basically couldn't close 100 schools. we have to ensure that the schools that are there are fit for purpose. But you're quite right. Rurality is it's something that has to be dealt with very sensitively in terms of area-based planning. And we do have a number of schools in the Western Board. They're well below the BAME numbers, and they will never close, simply because that they're far too far away from, you know, bigger schools or from centres of population. The travelling distances would be too great and so forth. So we would go out and talk to those schools, and we obviously keep them under review. And if they're continuing to provide fit-for-purpose experience for the youngsters, obviously they're going to survive. But I think as area-based planning, you know, embeds itself, I know that the boards and the Department of Education are suggesting that the whole process of area-based planning, that it becomes, if you like, more structured and more formalised, in that, you know, schools and everybody will be aware that probably on a yearly basis where somebody's going to be there talking to them about where they're at the moment. Now, obviously that has an implication for resources, but somehow we always find the resources within resources to do that, or we have up until now. But if that process was set out for schools, namely, you know, when it comes to April or May of any year, the annual profiles are going to be produced. And obviously then, you know, the boards and people need to get into schools and start talking to those schools that are at risk with regard to whether or not, you know, there needs to be any action taken. And I think it would be, we would believe that come the end of October, then these reviewed or revised strategic plans should be issued, and people should be aware at that stage of the terminology that we've been using, you know, no action, probably review, and all that sort of thing. It becomes so that when we arrive in schools, there is no surprise. They've been expecting us coming. And obviously the development proposal, if you're going to do something then, that development proposal process should kick in about sort of November to February time. And after that, obviously the Minister and the Department of Education are working on the ministerial decision with regard to what to do. And generally then, you know, in June of any year, a school would know what's going to happen. And I think rather than rush this process, and maybe we've been sort of, you know, through expediency in the past, there have been cases maybe when it has been a bit rushed, but we would be suggesting that there should be a year between the publication of the development proposal and when the actual rationalisation is going to come into place, namely the September following. So I would envisage that in the new authority, that obviously as these plans are published, there would need to be very close scrutiny of the plans with regard to those schools that are at risk, and then there would need to be resources, you know, put into looking at the schools that are at risk, and people would need to be prioritised. There won't be a need to. A lot of schools, there'll be no need to go near them. However, I take it that the new authority will be a leaner authority in terms of personnel.
Chair, could I add a very brief comment to what Rosemary said?
I'm just actually really conscious of time because we have run over our time.
Yeah, very brief comment. One of the most encouraging features that I think we've all seen in the last year or two, and members here will be very aware of the encouragement to schools to become much more self-evaluating. Actually, one of the really significant developments has been governors who reflect upon themselves in respect to their sustainability, viability and provision. And I know certainly I could quote, and I won't because of time, and members could equally, significant examples of where governors actually come to us and say, we've had a close look at ourselves. And in fact, some of the ideas around, we think if we work with the school up the road, we between us could be a viable unit and make sure we secure the education of children. So I just want to put on record our gratitude for those voluntary governors who do so much work under increasing pressure, but actually the fact that they are now much more coming forward, and that is true from the ground up, and that's a feature that's really developed.
And just going on from that, Rosemary, how do we measure, if we can see the geographical isolation, whether it's Rathlin or wherever, but how do we measure sort of the community engagement, or for that matter, as I say, most of the schools in the Fermanagh area particularly seem to share. How do we measure those things? How can those factors be taken into consideration as well?
You're quite right. In terms of the primary schools in Fermanagh, there has been a lot of sharing going on. Some of it at teacher level, and some of it, at pupil level. And obviously that is down to the finances made available by people like the Fermanagh Trust. Now, I'm not too sure, but I would imagine that whenever I have 14 schools sitting in the strategic plan that are interested in pursuing, shared education, but they're not really sort of at the stage of, coming together as schools. They need to do a lot more work. So I would be hoping that under the new signature project, that these schools will get the resources to continue that work. And I'm not sure as to what the baselines are at the moment with regard to the sharing that has gone on, but certainly there needs to be some identification of where those schools are at. And through the signature project, I would imagine that there will be measurement of some sort with regard to their progress.
And just on that as well, on a similar issue as well, take for example the likes of St Mary's and Brala there, and the relationship with, they have to travel to Enniskillen an hour and a half, whatever, but as opposed to, say, a relationship with Ballyshannon.
Yeah.
Are you considering the cross-border dimension as well, even particularly in some of maybe our small rural primary schools where there's a cross-border primary school that's only 2 or 3 miles away as opposed to 15 miles?
We haven't looked at that. Obviously, at the moment we're looking at the Brala situation, and I'm aware that the schooling system in the south is slightly different from ours here and so forth, that youngsters would need to stay an extra year, I think, in the north. And there's a lot of work would obviously need to go on before schools could actually, come together in that way. But I would hope that through looking at the Brala project, the post-primary project, that maybe, it's obviously a learning curve for us. We'll find out more about the systems, north and south, and then should the situation arise that we're looking at small schools on the border, that we're better informed with regard to how we could bring that about. But at this point in time, I would have to be honest and say we have a lot of learning to do.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak quickly to try and speed up the process here. Sorry. It's been really interesting to hear from you this morning. You mentioned there's a review of the number of empty places. And then you also said that was ongoing all the time. So which is it? And tell me how that's being undertaken or what's happening. And
it's actually part and parcel. It's an integral part of what is called the area planning process. In other words, that we are charged with looking at provision across all sectors within our areas of jurisdiction, and that means looking at what is provided and the most efficient way of providing that education to all children in an area. So that automatically takes into account if a school is half empty. Is it the most efficient of resources, and is there a better way of doing it? It's built into the data that underpin the area plans.
Okay.
But it would also be picked up in the reasons why there's such a split is also be picked up in times. For example, we're looking at financial provision of a school. So if a school, for example, was in deficit, and it's because its numbers had decreased, you'd look at that particular period of time. So what you have is you have the formal part where it's looked at as part of the area planning process, but you've also the issue that you may have circumstances that arise that, for example, their year 8 intake or the primary 1 intake is lower than expected, and that has a knock-on effect for the school. So that creates a situation where you maybe in over 2 to 3 years that their population decreasing. So you've got to look at it outside of the planning sequence. So there will be occasions when they're rising from the formalised part, but there's other occasions too. For example, there was one referred to with the Army coming in. Well, the Army coming in and changed where they were going had a big impact in one area from growth, but it had a reverse impact in another area. For example, we had one school that lost 25% of its population overnight.
I think maybe just to add to that, in a very specific way, I know certainly from my own perspective in North Eastern Board, members of the board have requested, and we have done this, we make representation to the department just on the basis of the calculation, because of this very strong view that what is going on in a primary school today may not be what was going on at the time when that equation was worked out, in terms of, as I gave the example a couple of times, the foundation stage and a very different methodology of teaching. So in a very straight answer, certainly we have gone back, and I'm sure colleagues in other boards and CCMS similarly, and simply raised the issue on behalf of our members with department officials that perhaps that's something that needs to be revisited, because if you remember back to when this all kicked off, the headlines in the press were around 80,000 spare places, and the issue is around what is a spare place, and we tend to use the phrase, and you've heard it probably this morning from all of us, unfilled places. Yeah. So just to reassure you, we have certainly gone back to the department and raised the issue on behalf of our, certainly in my case, on behalf of my members who want to have that looked at in the current modern context of the current Northern Ireland curriculum and the responsibilities on our primary schools.
So in fact, it's a really false headline to be coming out with so many thousands empty places, and this is the reason for looking at area plans. It's really not the reason why we're looking at area plans at all.
You'll understand my care at not commenting on that.
Okay, thanks. Can I just give an example of a school that has 58 in capacity, and that seems to be quite a small number. Is that school inevitably going to close then?
No. No, I think that it's been pointed out already that the position of that school will be looked at in the context in which it finds itself. Obviously, we do need to take into account the pattern of enrolment, the impact that is having on the financial position of the school, and then the impact that would then have on the ability of the school to deliver the curriculum. So it's not just a simple matter of saying that every school that falls below a particular enrolment is going to be closed. We do try to look at each individual case on its merits.
Well, I mean, its full capacity is only 58, never mind, its enrolment is maybe slightly more than half of that.
Yeah, well, I think that's the point Ray made, that there are some schools that don't have the capacity to take any more children.
Yeah. But you referred earlier to 85 being a reasonable amount, and at 58 it's 30 below that again.
But again, the school would be looked at within the context of where it finds itself. If that school was 10 miles away from the nearest school, and as a result of that school closing, the children were going to have to travel excessive distances, there might be a case for the retention of that particular school.
Okay, thank
you.
We
can't just adopt a hard and fast rule that X number of pupils equals a particular course of action.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Okay, thank you. I was interested to hear the different approach that CCMS were taking to the other boards, and you seem to be a bit slower come through the process, that you're just finished looking at schools with 2 teachers and you're now looking at 3. Is that right? Is that the case?
Well, I would disagree totally. I'm a bit slower. Absolutely disagree. When you're recording that, can you put a line on it? I think in the past 2 years, CCMS has achieved a huge amount of success in the area planning process. The delay is not so much in what CCMS does. The delay is caused by, perhaps as a result of a consultation exercise, the issue having to be revisited, or if you get to a development proposal stage, the length of time that it appears to take for a final decision to be made in relation to that particular proposal. CCMS can only take it to a certain point, and beyond that point the responsibility then passes to the Department of Education and then the Minister.
Okay, moving on slightly, can the extent, looking forward then to the proposals for a single educational authority, do you feel that, given the extent of the resources that's been used for this area planning process, do you think that a single educational authority would have been able to carry out such a task?
I think there are a couple of things to say on that. I think the first one, and I hope it's been illustrated by the presentation this morning, is that the process we're using is a joined-up process, and therefore whether it's 5 plus CCMS or 1 plus CCMS, in a sense, is irrelevant because we have a common process. In terms of taking it forward, I suppose we're into the realms then of the potential design for the new authority and so on. Certainly, I noted the Minister, when he was with yourselves last week, said that he recognised that a single authority will have a regional perspective that needs to be locally delivered. And I think from our experience in doing this type of work, the local delivery, the local relationships that we have with our areas and our schools are absolutely critical, because to get communities to open up to officials is based very much on trust, on relationships and so on. It's impossible, obviously, to comment in a specific sense around what capacity is needed to take this forward into the future. Certainly it does need a resource to deliver on it, and I hope we've illustrated that in terms of the way we interactively guide the process, but I wouldn't want to make any sort of speculative prediction as to what might be needed.
Can I just add something to what Ray said there, because we've touched on it this morning, but it hasn't actually been drawn out, and that is that there is a regional structure in place for area-based planning. There's an area planning steering group which is representative of the department and the chief executives of all of the organisations. There's also an area planning group at an operational level which involves all of the boards at CCMS, and there are also across some of the boards, and including our own to be actually established this month, area planning groups at a board level which involve Signet-G, NICE, CCMS, all of the managing authorities and interested bodies. So there is a formalised structure there, and there is a high level of standardisation and common approach to area-based planning that has evolved over the last 3 years, certainly.
Well, that was the next question I was going to ask about. Would there be the local knowledge with the single education authority, and you feel that would continue?
I think that's a challenge.
And do you think with the single education authority, would the CCMS coming in under the umbrella, so to speak, would that bring a different focus to how you plan?
Well, I don't think we are coming in under the umbrella of the single education authority.
Yeah, but they're represented on the.
That's the current position in terms of the board.
Yeah, I think that's all my questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, folks. A number of the questions have been dealt with in terms of the geographical isolation and the small schools, and I think the Fermanagh model as well. And you were very clear that that's learning and progress. I think the important thing today is that we're hearing that this is fluid, that this is flexible, that it's not a finite process. But I want to go back to the issue in relation to the perception or criticism, again, around it being a top-down process. And recognising some of the commentary already this morning about sometimes levels of engagement and difficulty through processes until almost it's in black and white when communities engage. But I know particularly yourself, Malachy, I mean, you refer to bringing a proposal to the community, and that obviously asks the question or begs the question, how many times did the community bring proposals? And you alluded then to no meaningful proposals coming forward, but you very clearly then put that responsibility back to the department. So I'm wondering...
In what sense?
Well, you said that the responsibility in terms of increasing or enhancing community engagement, you know, is something that the department need to do, or correct me if I'm wrong, that's what I picked up.
The point I made is that I think at a community level there's a lack of understanding about what area planning is actually about. The community, when you go to talk to the community tends to look at it simply as a process for closing schools.
Yeah. So what is it that the department needs to do?
I think the department needs to engage in a programme whereby they educate the community at large as to what area planning is actually about. You know, you take the documentation would be put out for consultation, but you have to ask yourself the question: how many people are aware that documents are there for consultation, and secondly, actually go and look at the documents and see what the documents are saying. So I think the department needs to engage in a programme of educating the community around what area planning is actually about.
Okay, accept that. So it's an education programme that you're suggesting. What about CCMS? What additional does CCMS or the other ELBs need to do?
Well, we've always prided in CCMS. We've always prided ourselves in the relationship that we have with our schools, and the strength of our organisation is built on that relationship that we have with schools. And I did say that if we identify a school that requires a review, we will not undertake that review without speaking to the principal, the trustee and the chair of governors, so they are aware that we are actually undertaking that review and why we're undertaking that review. And in terms of the area plans, when the draft area plans were being drawn up, we actually corresponded with every one of our schools and told the principals, the chairs and the trustee what was going to appear in that draft area plan. Then when they were published, we notified our schools that the draft area plans were out for consultation and that they needed to respond to them. So we have always kept the communication open between our schools, but at each stage of the process they were fully aware of what was going on in relation to their school. That's why it can be very frustrating when you go out to talk to a community and they turn around and say, we didn't know this was going to happen. And yet you're saying to them, well, like, we have kept you informed the whole way through the process from the very start that this is the nature of the discussion that was going on in relation to your school. So I think we do a considerable amount in ensuring that our schools are aware of what's happening.
I do accept the engagement and the continued engagement, and that you know, any such proposal is subject to consultation with the schools, and this very solid relationships with schools accept that. But equally, if there is a criticism, which seems to be a common thread, that certainly what we pick up is about the process, and you know, is there a better mechanism? Is there something additional, not only from yourselves, but I'm looking to the ELBs as well, that can be put in place to enhance that bottom-up approach or to support that engagement at that level?
Part of the process does actually, part of the message that is delivered during the process is this is the proposal we are bringing to you for consultation. If you as a community, in responding to that proposal, can bring forward an alternative, which turns out to be a viable alternative, then we within CCMS will actually look at that. And we have done that on several occasions, and the outcome of that has been a change to the actual proposal that was put forward initially. So there is that mechanism there, and that's why communities need to understand that the consultation isn't a done deal. It's not a rubber stamping exercise. And I know that I attended a number of meetings that Ray's board held 18 months or so ago, when that message was very clearly put out to schools. If you have an alternative, let us know what you think that alternative should be.
And is there anything additional?
Just to provide reassurance that, as we said, you know, there is significant engagement and consultation with communities. I suppose, I mean, one has to take on board human nature, and very often we discover in this process that if a discussion or a debate is moving in a direction that people don't like, you know, quite often, and I think this goes wider than our educational world, people have a tendency to blame the process. But I think, as Malachi has said, you know, numerous examples across all of the organisations of even at the very formative stages of all of this, getting out and having those discussions and debates with governors and with parents and so on. But we have to accept, and it's part of our day-to-day working life, that even where strategically and educationally something might be right for children, parents don't always agree with it because of the schools at the end of our street. And you know, we really don't care if it's slightly under in terms of numbers or whatever. We're happy with our school, and why would you change it? And you respect that. But as Malachi said and others, you create the opportunity, not just because at a certain stage of the process under statute you must, but actually, as Malachi has indicated, and again I'm commenting from the North Eastern Board perspective, when area planning was first commented upon, and I know my colleagues did similar work, we immediately got out and tried to explain what was going on to people, because at that time they were hearing all sorts of things, and also to encourage them to engage. And most of the draft area plans that were put out for consultation in March 12, I think it was, or around about that time, were very largely informed by local community and school and governor input in terms of shaping the process. So it's just to give you that reassurance, and I'm sure colleagues will not disagree in terms of what happened in other boards.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hazard.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation today. I'd just like to maybe inquire if there's any scope for flexibility in the 4-teacher criteria for primary schools, especially in regards to any potential proposals for shared sort of hybrid models.
I think we've emphasised very much all day today there is no line. There is an area where we actually look at particular parts, and we've said the 4 is something that we feel makes a good provision. But we've already give examples where, for example, it's less than that and it's actually viable. So no part of area planning is about lines in the sand. It's, you look at it in the totality. So there may be an area where you have a 4-teacher school or a 3-teacher school where it's actually justifiable due to other factors coming into place. You look at the totality, not just a line.
Thank you.
And
Could I just illustrate that in the Brookborough proposals? Obviously, if there was a single school being built for any one of those schools, it would have to be a 4-teacher school. That would be, the smallest school, obviously, that the department would build. But obviously, in those proposals, there wouldn't be pupils for 8 classrooms. And that's partly the reason why that project failed on the first call. Now, my understanding is that on the second call, we'll resubmit that for 2 schools of 3 classrooms each. Malachy, you can get me right here. So, as folk here have been saying, there are no lines drawn on the sand. You try and accommodate the communities as best you can.
That particular point opens the door for exploration of shared staff.
Yeah.
So if you have a 3-teacher school, if you have 2 3-teacher schools, there's potential there for them to look at the possibility of jointly employing a 4th teacher. And I think that actually happened in the North Eastern Board.
Yes, we have examples
so
of that.
There's already evidence of that.
And that, Chris, I don't know whether you were at the time we were referring to the Moy model. That was one of the initial parts we did because the school was actually way less than the 4-teacher part. But we actually, by introduced in the preschool provision, actually facilitate development as well. So it's a creative approach towards where you've got those circumstances applying.
Thank you very much. That's it. Thanks, Chair.
You'll be glad to know that no one else has indicated. Can I thank you? Can I thank you for your time this morning? I think members found that very useful, and we will be coming back to this again as time progresses. And of course, we'll all be in individual contact with you, I'm sure. Mr. Butler and I have a meeting tomorrow morning. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We wish you well. Okay, members, we have run over our time quite considerably.
All right.
When the department are obviously going to come and make their briefing, but if we can keep our questions quite pointed, if that's possible. I'm not looking at anybody in particular.
No, you've gone. Chair, could I just out of that and ask maybe follow up, Chair? They indicated that consultation was a priority. I'd just like to know what exactly is the consultation process that they follow. Certainly in the Southeastern, because Southeastern is run by the 3 board or 3 ministerial appointments, there is no input from parents or parents' representatives in the running of the Southeastern Board and the development of the area planning within the board. So what is the process that they follow? And a large emphasis was placed on community. What do they actually mean by community? What's the breadth of that? It seems to me it's really only the Board of Governors of schools and perhaps local representatives, and that's the extent of it.
Okay, if members are content that we write to the board, just asking them as ECMS, just to expand on those points.
Okay, so next briefing.
Next briefing.
Further patience.
Good afternoon. I thank you for your patience, but obviously we heard quite a lot of information now this morning, and members were very much engaged in that, and it was useful as coming forward then for the next briefing with yourselves. I'll just introduce you. It's Jackie Durkin, Director of Area Planning, Lorraine Finlay, Head of Area Planning Policy Team, and Doreen Edgar, Head of Area Planning and Policy Team. If you'd like to make an opening statement, you're very welcome to do so, or we can go to questions. Whatever suits.
I have a very short opening statement, if you could bear with me, Chair, but I am conscious of time, so if you prefer to move to questions now.
If you'd like to make it, if it's brief, then we can do that.
Okay, well, thankfully you've introduced us, and just to say that I've recently been appointed as Director of Area Planning, so I'm learning a lot about the area planning process as well. The Department welcomes this opportunity to provide the Education Committee with information on the strategic context within which primary area plans have been brought forward by the Education Library Boards, working closely with CCMS and the other education sectors. Some of what I have to say may have already been touched on by the boards and CCMS, so I'll try my best to keep the duplication to a minimum. I think it's worth noting from the outset that the concept of area planning is a simple one, that is to plan to meet the needs of our children and young people by putting the right type and size of school in the right place and by ensuring that the schools are providing high quality education to meet the needs of all pupils. However, as recent experiences have demonstrated, area planning is a complex, multifaceted process that requires vision and commitment and must focus on the needs of pupils rather than institutions. As the Minister has said, this is the first time planning on this scale has been initiated, and it is clear that we're all learning as the process progresses. It is vitally important that we reflect on what's been achieved to date, what the perceived barriers are, and to work with our education partners to continually improve and refine the process for the future. You've asked us here today to talk about the primary area plans, and you've also sent a letter about specific issues that impact on area planning. The Department has provided you with a written response on those matters. In support of the topic of primary area plans, which is the subject of today's session, you've been provided with some facts and figures that set the context for primary planning. I'm not going to go over the figures in detail, but I hope that you will agree that progress has been made. You'll be aware that the majority of surplus places in the primary sector, and since the introduction of area planning, over 5,700 places have been removed, while 1,820 places can be attributed to school closures. Interestingly, over 2,600 places have been removed through the amalgamation of schools. We've also seen schools being right-sized through reduction in the approved enrolment numbers, and this has removed over 1,200 further places. These figures cannot be netted off the total, as we've had other proposals for increasing school numbers, around 1,800 places being added when the proposals are fully implemented. This is again right-sizing provision in some areas to reflect parental preferences and population changes. All these changes have been brought about through the development proposal process. The increase in the number of development proposals are testament to the work of the Board, CCMS and the other education partners have undertaken to date. However, there is still much to do and momentum is vital. You'll see in your papers that I've outlined the time frame for the delivery of the primary area plans. There have been conflicting views about the primary planning process. Some say that the time frame was unduly protracted, and others have said that schools and communities have not yet been properly involved and the pace of change is too fast. The Department's role in the area planning process is to set the policy and budgetary context for area planning and provide advice and guidance to support the process. The Education Library Boards, working with CCMS and other education sectors, are charged with drawing up area plans for consideration by the Department. As you know, these were interim arrangements drawing on the powers in the current legislation and were put in place in anticipation that the Education and Skills Authority would be established and that it would be the single planning authority for all schools, taking account of the views from the sectoral support bodies. To support the process, the Department established the Area Planning Coordination Group in 2012, comprising the Department, the 5 Education Library Boards, CCMS and Chief Executive Designate of ESA. This was later expanded to include NICE, CNAG and a representative of the Department of Employment and Learning who provides advice on further education policy. The group became known as the Area Planning Steering Group. Through this group, the area planning process for the post-primary plans was examined and lessons were learnt and transferred to the primary process. Some of the criticisms of the post-primary plans were that they were not uniform and interested parties in all areas were not getting the same information. To address this issue, the Department worked closely with the planning authorities throughout the development of the primary plans to agree a primary plan template, and that was adopted by all the boards. Board and CCMS officers worked together to agree common language and a consistent approach to report their findings, and this is reflected in the primary plans. It's important to note that we have over 800 primary schools. Many of these schools will require no change, but there are significant numbers of schools that need to be assessed against the sustainable school policy criteria and the local area context, so firm proposals can be developed. It is inevitable and desirable that this requires a phased approach. However, the Department has asked the school managing authorities to deal with those schools evidencing most stress as a matter of priority. Area planning is a live and ongoing process which will be affected by the changes resulting from a single education authority. The Department intends to work with all the education partners to develop appropriate arrangements to ensure that area planning continues effectively with the aim of achieving a network of viable and sustainable schools. I'll end there, and Doreen and I will be happy to try and answer your questions.
Okay, thank you. And no doubt you'll hear some of the questions again from earlier, but are you in a position to give us a cost for this process? Obviously you bid for additional monies in June monitoring. The boards weren't able to give us a definitive costing. Can you do that?
We can't estimate how much the boards are spending individually currently within their existing resources on area planning, but we do have some information on the additional, while the full bid wasn't met, we do have some information on the funding that has been made available to the end of this financial year. To the various boards, so I'll pass to Doreen at this point and give you that information.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. We asked the boards and CCMS to give us some indication about what sort of extra resources that they needed, and then we scrutinised and challenged them. So although you had mentioned earlier that we had made a bid for the 1.2 million, not all of that money was actually needed based on their bids. So we got around 900,000, and then we allocated that out based on the fact that they wouldn't be able to have extra staff in post before December. So they were allocated that amount of money on a pro rata basis. So the like of CCMS got another 34,000, North Eastern got 44,000, Belfast Board got 44,000, the South Eastern Education Library Board got 47,000, the Southern Board got 54,000, and the Western Board got 34,000.
And they're already in receipt of that money?
Yes, that money has been allocated.
But there is still further assistance to be given with regard to staff resource?
This extra money was to cover the cost of engaging other staff, new staff, extra staff, to give a bit more impetus to the area planning process.
Okay. Well, you'll have heard the representative from CCMS saying that the assistance had yet to materialise.
I think he was indicating that the process to identify and recruit that additional resource has still not been completed, and obviously there'll be a time lag between them getting the money and how they decide to use it and allocate that resource. So, but they have each board and the CCMS received notification of the funding that was going to be made available for additional resources and support for area planning and the development proposal process.
Okay, I suppose what baffles me is the fact that we're well into a process, and yet no one is able to actually tell us how much the process has cost or is costing.
It's because area planning, as the representatives from the board are saying, is an integral part of what the boards do. They strategically plan for education provision in their area. Therefore, the budget that they already have is for that purpose. So all they're doing is, instead of strategically planning the way they did, they're now doing it under the area planning process. So it is a priority for the boards to strategically plan. So.
Okay. If we just turn to the letter which you referred to, which has made up our briefing papers today, and it's really around the methodology which is used to calculate unfilled places. I suppose it appears to be very mechanistic in its approach, and certainly the comments which were coming from the board is that perhaps it doesn't really reflect the reality of the current use of the school estate. Because the paper essentially admits, it says it's impossible to cost each unfilled space, so really we're not able to calculate if there are financial savings here, so therefore the financial savings are unknown. You're stating that the majority of schools' costs are people related and very much dependent on pupils, so as a result then there's no real staff efficiencies that can then be gleaned from that. And then you go on to talk then about it's important to make sure that schools have enough pupils to deliver a funding stream to enable the curriculum to be delivered. And again, I suppose that's really sort of, we talk then again about the size and how that correlates to performance, and research which we would have received say that very often that a small school can still perform well. So I suppose I'm asking whether or not there are any views within the department as to whether or not you want to look again at how the calculation of unfilled spaces is calculated, and whether there's any sort of possibility of maybe looking at enrolment as being the calculation that you use, as opposed to actually going through this process, which is quite mechanistic in its approach.
In terms of the process, the process uses, as it clearly says in the letter, it uses the approved enrolment number and the capacity of the school. Obviously, you can't have an enrolment number that exceeds the capacity that the school can take, because the children have to have desks and chairs and accommodation.
And I understand that, but that the issue is really about the unfilled spaces.
Yeah, so the difference between the capacity of the school and the actual enrolment number, so the number of children that are actually in the school and the capacity of school identifies the surplus places. But there are a lot of caveats around that information, as you can see, in terms of who's included in the numbers and who isn't. And I mean, the department has always been quite upfront about that the figures are, they are what they are, but there may be a better way of calculating it.
Okay, and have you looked at any other jurisdictions as to how they calculate?
Well, the difficulty is that our curriculum's not the same, and the school accommodation is designed to deliver the curriculum, so the difficulty is in that sort of transfer across if it's a different type of curriculum. And as Ray was saying earlier about the foundation stage, things have changed, but at the same time schools have also changed. While they were maybe originally built for a capacity of X number of hundreds, as the curriculum has changed, schools' use of the accommodation has changed as well. And there's also the Manhattan system that registers all the different types of use of all the different classrooms that the boards and the department both use. So,
okay. You said that progress has been made in so far in relation to bridging the gap of unfilled places, and obviously that's to be encouraged. But would those figures not have been achieved without this framework? Or do you feel that there's been much more positives have come out of the framework?
In terms of area
planning?
Well, I mean, you can see from the figures that we presented you that at different milestones throughout this process, we gave you figures from devolution to the Sustainable Schools policy, then from Sustainable Schools to area planning, and then from area planning to date. And you can see that there is a marked increase in the number of development proposals going forward.
But have many of those proposals come as a result of budget pressures on boards, where they've had to now be much more focused in their approach to looking at sharing enclosures and so on than they would have had to in the past?
I mean, the Minister has always made it very clear that area planning is not a cost-saving exercise. It's about more efficient and effective use of the money that we already have. So I think regardless of whether there had been severe budget pressures or not, that we would have had to do this anyway to make sure that we were getting the best results out of the money that we have available. And the Minister is very focused on putting money to the frontline services.
Okay, we had a discussion in relation to the numbers threshold of being of around 105, and obviously the boards now are looking around sort of 85 as a number. Are you taking that on board and accepting the arguments that are being put to you from the boards?
I think it's fair to say that the enrolment numbers are one factor in the 6 factors in the Sustainable Schools policy. So it's not just numbers of enrolment in isolation that are looked at, and there was many examples that the boards and CCMS gave about where smaller schools in isolated communities were required regardless of the pupil number. So it's only one of many pieces of information that's used and that boards use when they put forward development proposals.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers?
Ladies, you're very welcome. And just going on from a point you said, Lorraine, there about enrolment numbers mustn't be greater than capacity of the school. If you take, for example, St Coleman's in Lambeg, that have an enrolment number of 350. Their new school has 12 classrooms, but 350 gives you 50 children per annum. There's 2 classes by 7, which is 14 classes they need. Where's the logic there?
Well, I mean, each school decides how they set up their arrangements. You know, they decide on the number of teachers they employ. So therefore that determines the number of classes that they have. And the department, the accommodation schedules are for the number of children, not actually the number of teachers that a school decides to employ.
But with 350 pupils, your enrolment number, I think Dromore is another case in point in that as well. But with 350, there's no other way you could organise it.
Well, I can't talk about specific. I don't know the whole situation
okay.
at St Coleman's.
And just then going on from that quickly, and I think it's the North East Board talks about 2 unsatisfactory ratings from the ETI in terms of sustainability. What I'm really asking is, have ETI then a role in terms of sustainability?
Yes, because the ETI are in looking at the quality of the education provision and the management and leadership in schools, and they are 2 of the factors that we consider in the sustainable the schools. So yes, they do have a role. They're the department's professional advisors.
I think in particular of our rural primary schools, you know, there's many rural primary schools are under the 105 threshold and over the 85. So they effectively could have an unsatisfactory rating just because of their numbers, could they?
Not in terms of the ETI going in and saying that they were. The ETI looks at education quality.
Provision, yeah.
They will comment if a school has a number below the threshold, but as was said earlier by the boards, the Sustainable Schools Policy is a policy for review. It's not a school closure policy. So these are all the criteria in here are triggers for review, not if you don't meet it. You don't tick the box, you're closed. It doesn't work like that, and I think you got that sense from the boards and CCMS earlier.
Okay, and finally a bit glad to hear, for the Fermanagh experience, does the department support cross-border sharing, although it mightn't be cross-community sharing? You know, in terms of our small rural schools.
Yeah, I think the department is very open to anything that can allow children to avail of high quality education, and the Minister has given a commitment to explore cross-border options. But I mean, things that we will have to look at is that there are 2 different curriculums, there are 2 different age ranges for schools. So I mean, it's not without its challenges, but the department has committed to looking at it.
And just to add to that, it's actually in the terms of reference for area planning. That's one of the areas that you can consider as cross-border planning.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr Lunn.
Thanks, Chair. Well, you've already listened to me at length in the back of the room, so I'm not going to cover old ground again, but it's just to have this fear that we're embarked on a process here which doesn't seem to take account, on the face of it, doesn't seem to take account of the needs of one particular sector and the possibility of significant growth in that sector if it was allowed to grow in that way. So the question would be fairly simple. You have an obligation to facilitate and encourage. You have a ministerial instruction here, which I read out part of it earlier on, following the previous judgment, never mind. You have serious parental demand, as evidence any way you like it, that there's a big demand for integrated education. And you may, all that is kind of versus the needs model, which appears to state that it doesn't take account, doesn't allow for any growth in the integrated sector. And the Minister having said now that following the Drumragh judgment, or else it was the department issued the statement, that the needs model doesn't require amendment, that's fine, which is slightly contradictory to the emphasis of what the judge said, so that's for another day. How do you marry those 2 situations?
Yeah. I think the needs model gives you an indication of projected population, so projected numbers of school children that might be entering the school system, and it is just that, it's a number. it's numbers that project population, but there are other issues and factors that need to be taken into account, and the department's very clear about its statutory duty to encourage and facilitate integrated or Irish medium education. I think what I would say is it's a factor in terms of what projected enrolment might be. It's considered. It's one, again, the Sustainable Schools policy is very clear on the other factors, and we certainly would have a view that you need to look at the other factors that contribute to a sustainable school, and not just look at numbers in isolation. So the needs model is a useful indicator, but it's not the only thing that is looked at in terms of what other evidence do you have to support a sustainable school in a particular area.
Okay. If there was a development proposal to amalgamate two schools, one controlled, one maintained, which would be ideal in the circumstances of what you're trying to do, and that was supported by the governors and the trustees of both schools and the parents, could CCMS block it?
I think you would look to all the evidence and the consultation process and all the information that was coming through the development proposal process. I think don't think a lot of conversation this morning has been about the consultation process and the validity of it, and certainly when it gets to a development proposal coming forward to the department, there's a wide range of information, a wide range of consultation and material that's looked at and reviewed. So I think ultimately the decision to endorse a proposal that's put forward from one of the boards is a matter for the Minister, but that will be after close scrutiny and consideration of all the information that's put forward.
Yeah, you're nearly as good as Malachy.
Could I just add to that one of the models that is being explored under the shared education proposals is jointly managed schools, where Catholic and Protestant trustees and transferors come together. But the department is currently looking at that and how that could be given effect under legislation, or whether or not it would need new legislation. So, I mean, it is definitely there on the table as a possibility.
Yeah, that's okay. But I'm not really asking. What I'm asking is fairly straightforward. If everybody else was in agreement that the best solution for a local area was the amalgamation of these two schools, one from each sector, it comes before the Minister, and CCMS says no, we are the guardians of Catholic maintained education, and we will never agree to such a suggestion. Do they have the legal authority as a separate body from the boards to actually block such a proposal?
I don't think anyone has a veto when it comes to a development proposal. It would depend on what the proposal is. If it is for a Catholic managed school, it would depend on the management type of the school. They're obviously the guardians of the Catholic maintained sector. But a new school coming forward, what would that management type of that school to be? It might be
Wouldn't necessarily be a new school.
Other maintained. Well, I think it may have to be a new school, because an amalgamation requires the closure of two schools and the opening of a new one.
On one of their respective sites?
Well, not necessarily. They may eventually go to
not necessarily
a new site.
New construction. I mean, the sensible solution may be to, as perhaps in the Moy, to amalgamate them on one site. I'm just interested in the authority of CCMS here and their ability to do their own thing no matter what anybody else thinks. And how that affects or could affect a genuine area planning process. Because it does seem to me that they have been able down the years to go their own way. And when they said earlier on, Chairman, that the CCMS have made great progress in all this. Well, they have. They've made great progress in area-based planning for the maintained sector. That's what they've done. Mm-hmm. So, I know you can't really give me a definitive answer, but I'll be interested, Chair, to find out if CCMS have the power to block such a proposal. If the trustees and the Board of Governors and the parents of both schools have expressed a wish, and the Education Board in question has no problem with it, What can CCMS do about it?
I think the point is that CCMS can make their views known like everyone else, and the final decision maker is the Minister.
Yeah.
And as Jackie said, he will weigh up all the information and take a view on that, what he thinks is the best way forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank the members for coming up. And mine's a very, very short question. Special needs schools and area planning around that. We're about something like 20 months late on the delivery of a plan. Am I right in that?
Through the Chair, the Minister did see some plans for special needs schools, but he asked that a more strategic view was taken, so he charged the Belfast Board, who had a particular expertise, to produce a report. So that was just, I think, in January this year. So that report, I beg your pardon, is nearing completion at the moment.
That was supposed to be delivered
June.
No, the first report was supposed to be delivered, what, about 20 months ago or something like that? No? Am I wrong in that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So when are we actually going to get a plan on the special needs schools?
Right, well, as I say, the report that is being written by the working group is nearing completion. So I don't want to give you a specific date, but it's almost there.
Have a guess.
You don't need to shout at me.
It's nearing completion.
It's nearing completion.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kinahan.
Thank you. I have two very short questions. I think you heard my concerns with the previous. But one is just, I was with CCMS the other day and they were showing me some figures that justified or didn't justify numbers of pupils coming in. Does everyone get the same set of figures, or would CCMS be using their own figures, the department be using their own figures and controlled? Is it the same set of figures that everyone's working to?
Well, it should be, but we couldn't say for sure. You know, if there was other information or data that CCMS had, but certainly in terms of what's published on the departmental website around information on the needs model, whatever we would certainly be working from a place that all the boards and CCMS were using that data.
Okay. So there is a ship. Okay, and then my other question is more on, it's probably more to the rural areas, where you're looking in area planning on schools sharing or amalgamating eventually or closing. Is anyone actually looking at the transport cost effects of each school and actually taking that trend forward? Because if you went back about 30 years and looked at transport costs, I mean, I'm guessing they've probably doubled, trebled, presumably into the future.
Yeah.
We've got similar.
Well, whenever the boards put forward development proposals, transport costs are one of the areas that they would look at, and certainly when it comes into the department, we would work with colleagues who are involved in school transport and seek their views on the development proposal and potential impact on transport and transport costs.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Newton?
Just another very short one. Sure. Sorry, I should have raised this with the previous delegation. In the Belfast area, I think it is in particular, Irish medium education provision. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are estimated to be 1,500 places available, and 1,000 of them, is my understanding, which are currently filled. Is that? Am I right?
We wouldn't have those
don't have exact figures on the Irish medium sector, but you've got to remember that it's a growing sector, and sometimes there's, when a development proposal is approved, it's approved to allow a phased growth to a certain number. So I'm not quite sure if the figures you are taking are the final figures that would be, that, you know, what the school would be projected, the projected enrolment would be. Because we always approve a development proposal allowing a school to grow, and in developing sectors, same as the integrated sector, there's a...
I was actually going to contrast that to your answers to
yeah, so was I.
Well, to Mr. Lunn, you know, I mean, if I am right in the places, how long or how would you look at those? I mean, if it is 1,000 places filled and 1,500 available, how are you going to look at those places?
The Sustainable Schools policy applies to all schools, so the same process. And the annual area profile, the same process, and you would be expecting the school managing authorities to then look at if there's some of these schools that are evidencing severe stress, that the same rules apply to all schools.
Okay, so if I look at the figures, I will find that the projections will indicate that those 1,500 places will be filled in the Sustainable Schools policy.
Well, we would expect places to be filled, yes.
So you'll just allow those to sit there in the meantime?
No, they need to be picked up in the area planning process.
All right, so
they can't just sit there and wait until they fill.
Okay, so within that area planning, okay.
You would expect boards to be identifying, as Lorraine said, those schools should be identified and be picked up through the stress indicators, through the annual area profile, and for some action to be taken on those.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I understand, obviously, you're working on a regional strategy for Irish Medium. Is that what the delay is in relation to actually addressing some of the issues within Irish Medium?
The Minister had commissioned a ministerial advisory group to prepare a paper, and they have done that. It was on post-primary Irish medium education, so my understanding is that it has been reviewed within the department, and it's with the Minister now for consideration.
Okay, but in the meantime, is that why then there's a hold on any movement with regards to addressing the issues of unfilled places then?
I wasn't aware that there was a hold on addressing surplus places in the Irish medium sector.
Maybe through you, Chair, maybe that could be confirmed then to the committee.
Sorry, Chair, just for factual accuracy, if you look at the board's plans, all of them indicate that in respect of Irish medium schools, there were no proposals, even where there were schools with large numbers of vacancies, no proposals for change because they were awaiting a regional strategy for Irish medium education. And that's the primary school plans I'm talking about.
Are the members saying that plan is now ready?
No, we'll come back to you with that one because we'll need to check what it actually says in the area plans again, and I do know that the ministerial advisory group was specifically focusing on post-primary education.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lunn.
Robin probably made the point for me. I'm interested in this notion of phased or anticipated growth, because that's exactly what's missing. I mean, if there's a clear demand which could produce growth in a particular sector, surely there should be some recognition of that in the area-based, in the plans, in the needs model again.
The needs model does a particular job, which is to project population projections. We have always said that the area boards and the planning authorities can look within their own area and they can adjust the needs model. They don't have to accept it in its entirety. Right. It is simply a projection of population population based on NISRA statistics. But if the board or CCMS or NICE or CNG feel that there is a need to alter those projections going forward to allow for growth in any sector or in fact for contraction in any sector, then they can do that.
The way it sits at the moment, it gives the boards and the department another excuse to hold back the development of what should be a growing sector based on this popularity and demand. That's what it does at the moment.
But the needs model doesn't project parental preference or demographic trends and where people move or work or whatever. Again, as Lorraine said, it's about projected numbers of pupils, but it doesn't give that sort of those projections, and that's where it's open to the boards through the development proposal process to make that information through NICE or our CNG to say where's the information and the evidence to say there is a projected growth in that area and how that's.
Sorry, but correct me if I'm wrong, I may have the wrong impression here, but does it not project the number of places required in the controlled and the maintained sectors?
If all things remain the same.
If all things remain the same, but it doesn't project any growth in the integrated sector, or the Irish medium for that matter. That's what I keep banging on about.
The point is that if it projects as if everything remains the same, but the planning authorities working with CNG and NICE have the ability to change that?
Yeah, they have the ability to turn down a number of transformation proposals because it might upset the apple cart in terms of the projected numbers in each sector, and perhaps even damage, the old chestnut about damaging existing school provision. I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Just a few questions, and you may or may not have the answers to these, but if you don't, and you can get them, I appreciate you could forward it on. But does the department have a target number of primary schools that it wishes to achieve?
No.
No, it doesn't. Okay. And just in relation to, and I know you've talked, this isn't about money, but obviously a number of schools have been closed and amalgamations have taken place. But would you be able to provide us with information as to how much money has been saved as a result of the reduction?
No.
You can't do that. Can you tell us how any of the schools which have been closed or amalgamated, whether they had deficits?
Yeah, we could tell you that. Yeah.
And also whether any debts then had to be paid as well?
Yeah, we can certainly give you the information about deficits on closure or amalgamation,
Okay,
whether they had surpluses or deficits.
That would be useful.
We could tell you that.
Thank you very
How
much.
far back would you like to go?
I suppose really within the last 5 years.
Were there any sales of properties that brought in any funds?
We can find that out for you as well.
That'd be useful. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
for your time.
Thank you.
In addition to that information, is there anything further that you'd like to ask the department to clarify? We can write to them.
I could probably write a small encyclopedia, Chairman, but I'll wait. I mean, we're going to start the review of shared and integrated shortly, and I think a lot of this will be brought out during that, so I'll keep it powder dry as best I can.
If you'd like to give the clerk then permission just to reflect on Hansard, and if there were a number of issues maybe just require clarification on the basis of what's been said, that we can maybe write on.
Well, I would be interested to know if CCMS have any power to block a development proposal that affects one of their schools, because they seem to have a level of autonomy that is, beyond what the board has.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Just to be clear on the Irish medium issue, this is page 17 of the North Eastern's area plan. What it indicates is that discussions will take place from a Northern Ireland strategy for Irish medium education, which is being formulated. The issue of future provision of primary Irish medium schools is being addressed through discussions at the Area Planning Steering Group chaired by DE, who were just here. So that was just something that I recorded in notes that for none of the Irish medium schools there were no proposals for closure, amalgamation, or it would appear any development proposals, except maybe some expansions in some cases. But there appeared to be a reference there to an Irish medium education strategy, which the committee hadn't heard about before. There was a post-primary plan, knew about that. The Minister told us about that. But this seemed to be something else, which the department didn't ask. So perhaps, Chair,
We could write about that as well.
Also, does the committee want to write to the Belfast Board expressing disappointment that they didn't come today, asking them to come another time when they could talk about the primary school plans, but also the special schools as they're in the lead for that too?
That would be useful. Obviously, the committee are aware that the Northern Ireland Audit Office are going to be they're working on or preparing a report on area planning. So once that then is with the Public Accounts Committee, that means that we can no longer look at the subject. But just in the meantime, would you like us to maybe look at a further stakeholder event? I believe the last one was quite useful, and we could report on that quite soon. If you would like, the clerk could go and prepare something in and around that and plan for that type of meeting.
I think so, because I think we're all getting a lot of concerns which we're not quite getting the answers to, and I'd like to just get more detail on it, so please.
Okay. Happy to do that. Okay.
So the clerk to come back with something.
Clerk to come back. Thank you. That's you, Peter.
Sure, I have a delegation.
Okay, thank you. Just move then quickly through correspondence. I'm just referring to pages 245 to 376 with 16 items provided under correspondence. The dissolving boundaries of shared education. If you're content, what we will have, we'll ask Professor Austin to come up and brief us on the 10th of December, just as part of our inquiry into shared and integrated education. It's going to be difficult for us to attend that, although it would be very useful for us to see. And I think it wasn't possible for us to attend just for a short period. I think we needed to be there for the full session. So, we've also then got the business plan and the programme for government. The responses are 246. This was in relation to committee queries around those two programmes. Are members any comments on those?
Just in terms of that programme for government, it explains about the targets and so on in Scotland and Wales and England. It would actually be good to know what their targets are, because when we asked the representative from the department, they didn't know what percentage were to 5 ASCs, including English and Maths. It would be useful to find out those. Okay, the system's different in Scotland, but I think the English and the Welsh system would be useful for us.
Okay.
So,
There's another point was obviously raised by Mr Newton around the special school area planning, and again I think it'd be useful to get information on that, along with the revised curriculum.
I was on the continuous professional development, just concerned that we're into another strategy reporting back in 2015, and yet the comment at the bottom was indicating that they are investing in it, but I think we should explore that a bit more.
I have a few more.
Sorry.
I think 715, the EQIA, in terms of the Common Formula Fund.
Can we just finish this one? There was also the comment was made that the PEDU action plans on school catering and school transport are not going to be published. Our members can tend to be right again, maybe just to seek that information, and also clarity around parental engagement with early years. And just really to the extent in which it has increased. If you could really just want to deal with that point. Sorry, you want to move on to other items, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, just in terms of that programme for government and the targets, so I'll ask Ray's then to do us like a one-pager, which compares and contrasts.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
And 7.7, the autism one. So, I think we all have concerns there of sort of the relationship between the Department of Education and Department of Health in terms of early intervention. I have particular concerns about not alone autism, but speech therapy, all sort of early interventions. So maybe something like that. And then the other one I said was 715, which was EQIA, where a certain rejigging of budgets or of whatever. It'd be good for us to get a report from the department how that's going to work itself through, because we don't want to go into the next budget round or into the next school budget round with the same problems we had last year.
And that's obviously something which primary schools are now raising as an issue around that sort of transitional fund.
Yeah, in terms of the EQIA, you want to write the department looking for some clarity on the 15-16 budget position. And as for the autism area, that is something that the committee, not necessarily autism, but it was around health education overlaps. That was something we're going to look at. Are we pretty content to pick it up there?
When would we hope to be looking at that?
It would be later this year, because we're trying to get clear of our inquiry.
But I'm sure everybody around the table is getting those queries from parents about the lack of, about the disconnect between health and education, particularly in terms of early intervention, whether it's speech therapy or any of those things,
Might it be useful to have a joint discussion with the Health Committee? Chair of the Health Committee is here.
Yeah.
I mean, it was apparent in some of the evidence sessions that we had from the Trust representatives as well as the ELBs that there is a disconnect. And I think that it would be worth exploring, particularly in terms of early intervention work. So I think it would be definitely, in what format it takes, it'll happen enough to explore that in more detail. But
I take a roundtable stakeholder event, or it's only a comment. It's not a proposal, or perhaps just a discussion just between members as to a common approach. Something that's informal.
As an interim, could get Assembly Research to do something on autism, just what the policies are and what the interventions currently are, what the issues might be, because there are a number of players, as you know, in autism, so that might inform members. And what I could do then is I'll just summarise what we've done. Committee's done quite a bit of work on this, and there's quite a lot of stuff ongoing. There's a number of reviews, the multidisciplinary support teams and the allied health professionals. As the chair of the health committee will be aware, those things are ongoing. So I could come back to the committee with just a little note, just telling you where we are, and then you could decide what we should do and when. That's okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Two little things. One on point 6, which is 7.12 on the shared educational campuses. I wonder if we could write and ask if they're going to put a facilitator in to help with schools that are involved, because I know 1 or 2 got turned down. There was something just to put a mechanism in that would nudge it.
Chair, do you actually want a briefing on this from the department on there? This is about the shared education campuses. There's revised criteria, and I think the committee had indicated previously that it might want to hear about it. So I could give them the heads up that you also want to know about facility.
Okay, and then the final thing is on still chasing up Simon Hamilton to come back on the consequentials on the finance, which was 7.25. Is there any way we can keep the, or ask this minister whether he's put in for that funding? Because we get the indication it exists. There was 38.3 million of resource and capital.
I think, Chair, we had previous correspondence where the Minister had written to the DFP Minister, but we can write again.
I just think we should keep pushing. It's the budget system. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Are members content then that we... Sorry, Mr.
There's only one, 7:30, the visit to Bangor Primary School. Are we going to progress that? I think that was to replace the proposed visit to one in Carrickfergus.
Although I think we've agreed to visit Drumra and Shimna, haven't we?
That's correct.
No, this is a primary. It was part of the review.
Inquiry.
I think we had agreed to go to Glen
Craig.
Yeah, but I think they can't have us for some reason, so ICS suggested Bangor Primary.
Okay. If the members wish to do that.
Wasn't listening.
That we visit Bangor Integrated Primary. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so members are then content to deal with the rest of the correspondence as on the cover sheet. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving then to the draft forward work programme. Peter, would you like to speak to any amendments?
Chair, not much in it. Just as you just discussed, the briefing from Professor Austin on the 10th of December, and the committee had previously agreed to go to Drumra and to Shimna, and the provisional dates for those are 25th February and 11th of March, if members want to save the date. And so the idea, I think, we'll have a meeting there, because it's a way to go. Shimna, I know, is involved in shared education as well as integrated, obviously being integrated schools. I think that was all there was in that is different, Chair.
Okay, content to agree with the forward work programme. Thank you. Any other business? No, thank you very much. Next committee meeting is next Wednesday, the 13th of October at 10 a.m. in this room. Members are content. The committee's adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, thanks, members.
Back to your old ways with long committee.